now read the karakia. Whakataka te heo ki te ura, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai, e hi aki ana te atakura, he tio, he huka, he hohu, ti he mariora. And my apologies for the pronunciation. Thank you. Right, let's get started. Welcome everyone to the Finance and Performance Committee meeting. Please let myself or the Democracy Advisor know if you intend to leave the meeting. At the start of each paper and when we vote, I will ask for you to make sure your cameras are on so that we know that you're there. And I know we're working on Zoom, so that just presents just one or two extra little challenges. We will schedule morning tea at 10:30 or thereabouts. And just a reminder, we do have the development contribution policy hearings, which start at 1:30 and go through to 3 o'clock. And so basically what that means, we won't be finishing early because the time's all scheduled. So the last one is due to finish at 3 o'clock, and we'll close the meeting at that point. So in terms of apologies, I have apologies for early departure from Liz Kelly, and also from Councillor Fitzsimons will need to leave the meeting part way through on council business. Is there any other apologies? So I will move that we accept those apologies. Could I have a seconder? Thank you, Deputy Mayor Free. I'll now put the motion, which has been moved and seconded. If you could vote on the reactions button, please.
Just waiting on Councillor Fitzsimons and Councillor Young.
Sorry, I just can't find the button. I'm on my iPad and I can't find the button. I've got it. No, wrong button.
And my one's not working, but I got it. Have I? Yes.
Yep. Thank you, Liz.
Yep. So that's 13 votes in favour. That has carried.
Thank you. All right. Conflict of interest declarations. I call on members to declare any conflicts of interest that they may have in relation to the items on the agenda.
Oh, shit.
Councillor Young, we don't have to worry about the noise coming from your builder next gate.
Okay, it's the iPad that's the problem. I just want to say, do I have a conflict of interest as we are going to be discussing water metering and I have a water meter?
I don't think so. Because I think we all pay water rates in some form or another, whether it be meter or a targeted rate.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so no conflicts of interest. And now we'll move on to the confirmation of the minutes from the last meeting. I move the motion that we approve, that this committee approves the minutes of the Finance and Performance Committee meeting held on the 18th of November 2021, having been circulated, and that they are taken as read and confirmed as an accurate record of that meeting. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Foon. And could you please vote? I'll now put the motion, and yeah, you know what, if you can find the right button.
Just waiting on Councillor Fitzsimons. That's 13 votes in favour, carried unanimously.
Okay, declare the motion carried. Now, there are no items that are not on the agenda, but I'd like at this stage, because we're in unprecedented times, just to acknowledge the work that our council officers and other government agencies are doing in respect of the protest at Parliament. Regardless of your views, I think we need to acknowledge the staff involved. It's been a very busy period. We know our officers were working over the weekend, and I'm sure other officials were. And I just want to acknowledge the tolerance that's been shown by Wellingtonians to accept this protest and for people to be able to peacefully protest. However, Wellingtonians' patience has now run very thin. And what we need to call on, and I know but I want to formally state that we need to ask all those protesters to make sure that they are following the law, they leave our streets, and they allow Wellingtonians to move around the city in a safe way. So I'm sure not many of them will be watching this this meeting, but making it clear that from a finance and performance perspective of the city and also the health and safety of our city, that we need our city back. And they have a big part to play in that. Anyway, moving on to public participation. There are no requests for public participation, and we will now I will move the items on the agenda. I'm just reordering them, and that's just to enable us to have a better flow. So first up, we will deal with the procurement strategy. We will then move into the report from the Audit and Risk Committee, which is around health and safety, and also the recommendations of the water activities rate setting. We will then move to the paper we have on our agenda around water activity rate setting. And then the rest is dissolution of the Wellington Regional Strategy Committee, appointments to council-controlled organisations, the forward programme, the action tracking, and then we will, subject to when we finish that, we will take a break until we hear from the hearings for the development contributions, which will commence at 1:30. Right. Okay. We now move into general business and with the procurement strategy update. And I welcome Leston Burke and Sarah Hay to introduce the report.
Thanks, Chair, and I'm really pleased to introduce to the committee Easton Burke, who's been acting in our commercial partnerships manager role for a while now, and hopefully we will be finalising that recruitment process soon. So you'll get to know a single face for a little bit longer. Easton's going to talk to the paper and we'll introduce it for you, and we're happy to answer questions as well. I just would draw your attention to the updated substantive. There is a new note. Heidi, I wonder if you could bring it up. That note that in the update that we will bring back in 6 months' time to the committee will also provide details on how council will provide impact reporting that can be made publicly available, as well as how targets for social enterprise are defined in the broader outcome strategy. So that will be included in the next update. But again, happy to take any questions on those things as well. So Easton, introduce the paper. Thanks.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Council, for affording me the time to present the paper. So, the procurement strategy was approved in February 2021, and councils have taken through the implementation plan in April of that year. The purpose of this particular paper is to provide an update on how we have operationalised this strategy and how we are tracking on the activities identified with the sub-working group in April 21. The 5 procurement objectives, as outlined in the paper and underpinning the strategy, have been adopted and are influencing the way we now work with stakeholders, both internally and externally with our supply market. To further operationalise the strategy, we have developed a broad outcomes framework containing a tendering toolkit and reporting structure to help support us on our intent to deliver tangible secondary outcomes from our day-to-day commercial activities. It is another step in our evolution from a primarily cost-driven commercial function to a value for money plus outcomes-based approach, and something that the team are proud to be involved with. It is important to note that even though it is an area that has widely been discussed for the last few years, the practical application of seeking broader outcomes largely remains a new practice for the government procurement sector. And to assist us on our journey to embed and mature these broader outcomes into our culture, we have seconded Alice Bray, who is a leader in broader outcomes for Waka Kotahi, and she's been instrumental in helping us develop this framework. And obviously an important aspect of our procurement function is to address cost savings. And in the past year, along with developing these frameworks, contract management and broader outcomes, we have focused on mitigating cost escalations wherever possible, which inherently result in cost savings to council. Our contract management framework, recently approved by ELT, will assist in the identification of further cost savings and the benefits that are already contained within those contracts. We will undertake sound analysis, renegotiation for some quick wins. We'll have better planning for retendering and rationalisation, and also look at aggregating volume and leveraging our procurement spend. The paper talks in more detail about a number of our key achievements to date and our future area of focus over the next 6 months, namely to implement and embed both the contract management and broader outcome framework with a revised procurement policy which is flexible and adaptable, so we can change as the market does in these times. Thank you. Happy to answer any questions.
Councillor Matthews.
Thank you. I've just got a question if there are any actions to be updated with regards to supporting the living wage, because I, didn't see that in the paper. Thank you.
Yeah, in the most recent tender around security services, that was a precondition. So we are actively incorporating living wage into these contracts, and it is part of our broader outcomes framework.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Councillor Foon.
Kia ora, and thank you so much, the mahi. Just will we be able to see the broader outcomes policy or document? Is that something that would be available to council?
Yeah, Councillor Foon, even though it's an operational toolkit that helps the business do procurement in a new way, we're happy to share that with councillors who are interested. Easton, what's the by the end of the financial year, we'll have sort of the whole rounded toolkit, which includes
the procurement policy, procedures, contract management framework, broader outcomes. As they're all interactive, I'd like to package them up and release them all together and have a more interactive feel on the website, etc., and just enables officers to conduct procurement more efficiently and to also engage the market. So I think by the end of this financial year, everything will be in place.
But the broader outcomes toolkit or framework can be shared after this meeting, yeah, for anyone who's interested. Yeah.
Great, exciting, thank you. I have another part, if that's okay. So basically you're saying, just to clarify, that the timeline for updating our policy and making that public would be by the end of this, you're aiming, for the end of this financial year?
Yeah, especially the procurement policy. So we're currently consulting with the market on how best to deliver a number of procurement initiatives, especially around physical works, or where we need to, what we need to do is be more adaptable and flexible whilst maintaining the rigors and some governance in our decision making. But what we're finding, we're frequently not only competing in the same market as other government agencies, but also against ourselves. And we have multiple tenders out in the market, multiple business units for the same sort of services, and it's probably not working for the market or for city council. So we're just looking at ways with the market on how better to deliver procurement and reach the outcomes we're seeking.
Sounds quite complex as well. So yes, and just in terms of the supplier channels, the supplier panel, just wanting to check, is there a way that we're selecting, a diverse panel so that we're getting, so that we're trying to seek more diverse outcomes?
Yeah, of course. So again, that's what the broader outcome framework does talk to, and that is what we're trying to embed in all our procurements going forward. So panels will work in certain elements and for certain works and services, but not for all. And that will apply from a diverse sector as well. But it will be incorporated.
Great, thank you. Those are my questions for now.
Thank you. Councillor Condie.
Kia ora, thank you, Chair. My question is just about the feedback we had from the auditor about our procurement process, which was discussed briefly at Audit and Risk. Whether you can just kind of update for the committee of the whole what that feedback was and how we're planning on incorporating it in the future.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. So we've developed the contract management framework specifically to address what Audit New Zealand reported on and the outstanding issues around centralising contracts, being able to have a helicopter view and manage these contracts, which includes just sound contract management, again, around ensuring what we are contracting for is being delivered for what we're paying, that the contract is being managed and performance is being managed on both sides, and contract management plans and closing out the contract. So just to ensure that we take some learnings from the contracts, and it also allows us to plan for the future in terms of retendering at an adequate time. And they have been addressed, I believe.
Okay, no more questions. All right. I will ask Councillor Fern to move this paper. Councillor Fern.
Awesome. Well, I'm sure my enthusiasm for this procurement strategy is out there, but I really just want to take a moment to thank officers, and it is a privilege for me to be able to move this today, and so that we can all understand and get a sense of the process and the progress that is going on to align our procurement with our strategic direction, because essentially this is what this is all about. So yes, a big thank you to officers, and I understand that there have been some recruitment challenges, so I just want to acknowledge that in the process. And I think, you know, the way that we spend money and how we spend it to align with our values is really important. And we have an obvious example where if we're moving toward a zero carbon strategy, we have a zero carbon strategy, then purchasing fossil fuel vehicles without really looking at that. So shifting to electric vehicle is a really obvious example of how we are aligning with our strategic direction. I want to acknowledge the journey, that it does take time, and that these progress updates are really important, especially for enthusiasts like me, to say, calm the farm, we are on the journey and this is what's happening. But just to acknowledge that the council-wide contract management framework, so that we're really getting a full ownership of contracts from within council. These are really important part of the efficiencies gained by this. And as Yeston talked about, just even the complexity with multi-departments approaching companies for contract services. So surely there's got to be efficiencies there for the businesses that are out there, and that actually gives us a competitive advantage in the market, that we are a good operator to deal with. And as we know, this is a really critical time for us at the moment. The part that really makes me excited is the impact. So just reading what we've done so far, so employment partnerships with MSP, a confirmed contract with a 100% Māori-owned business, and as Councillor O'Neill and I have been advocating for, but you know, working on a contract along with a contractor to plant 10,000 more trees. I hope we can include that in our total. These are the kind of outcomes that we're looking for, that are win-win for an organisation, because they build purpose and meaningfulness within organisations, but also once again help council on our strategic goals. Another outcome that I've noted alongside this paper are the partnerships. So it's my favourite sustainable development goal. It's number 17. And we are seeing that by working with central government and other councils, we're getting better outcomes for all of us as well. So I just also note the economic wellbeing strategy, you know, like our goals and outcomes that we settle on there will also become part of the strategic work. So so I present this paper to you all now. I don't have a seconder, so I'm looking out there, Councillor Covet, thank you, that would be lovely. But yeah, so I'm looking forward to the public reporting on impact, and thank officers for incorporating this in the substantive, that this is something we'll be reported back to in the next reporting in the next 6 months. But yes, I'll just come back to, yes, spend your money where you want to have the change, and so that's what we're doing here with this procurement strategy. So thank you to officers, and thank you to my colleagues for your support on this.
Okay, and I will second it. I'll speak very briefly, and thank you, Councillor Foon, for your enthusiasm and making sure that this carries on through. But we are in difficult times, so I absolutely appreciate the environment that we're working in and the challenges around procurement. So even if we have the money, actually being able to resource what we need to undertake these projects in line with our strategy may well be challenging, and even more challenging coming up. And I'm very keen to see that making sure that what we do actually does achieve the outcomes or the impacts that we want to see. So I think that is absolutely critical, because we don't want to be spending money and find that it doesn't make the difference that we expect it to. So we should always be reviewing that. So thank you. And next we have up is Councillor Condé.
Thank you. Just briefly to touch on some of the more boring kind of contract management hygiene things, that is really great to see from an audit and risk point of view, the progress that staff are making on lifting our practice in that area and meeting the suggestions that are coming from audit and risk and from the auditor. So it's great to see that progress happening, and also just to acknowledge the savings and value for money that are being delivered in this part of the organisation. Right across the organisation, the amount of savings that have been delivered during a pandemic without cutting our services has been extraordinary. And this is one part of that, and just want to acknowledge and thank the staff who have been working so hard on that.
Thank you, Councillor Condé. Are there any other speakers? Right, Councillor Foon, right a reply.
Just to thank you, Councillor Covet and Condé, for your comments, but I will also just note that impact on procurement is a global movement, and that it is great to see Wellington City Council join in the progress, but also note that central government is moving in this direction. So I welcome our partnership with them and other councils to keep moving forward and show leadership and show our Wellington community the benefits that we are providing for them through this spending. Thank you.
Thank you. So I will now put the motion forward that's been moved and seconded. And would you please vote? Are you all happy to take them all together? I take it. Yep, voting started. Good.
Just waiting on Liz Kelly. That's 15 votes in favour, carried unanimously.
Okay, thank you. I declare the motion carried. Now we will move on to the report of the Audit and Risk Subcommittee meeting of the 2nd of February, and we will deal with the Health and Safety and Security report. Now I have asked officers, whilst this has been through the committee, I've asked officers to provide us with a brief update on COVID related aspects, and also to touch on the health and safety of our staff in respect of the protest occupation. So over to you, Meredith and Wendy. Welcome to you both.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, look, given we've reported already to risk and audit, I'd like to touch on a couple of points first and then give you an update on our COVID response.
Yeah.
So just first and foremost, personal confrontation remains Council's top hazard and is consistent with previous reporting periods. This is continuing to be the trend with health and safety and the team providing regular support and advice in this space. I'd also like to update you on the health and safety management reporting system because a considerable amount of work was completed prior to Christmas by the project steering group and the working groups on the procurement of a new health and safety reporting system. Requests for tenders commenced on the 17th of January and closed next week, which is when we will start the evaluation phase of this project. The opportunity to have a new reporting system in place will greatly assist in all aspects of health and safety. I'll now move on to an update on COVID response work. Again, there's been a lot of work put into this space. The implementation of our vaccination policy with staff has been a key focus for our HR team. We have been working through the logistics of red phases under the traffic light system, including our responses when staff are identified as close contacts and positive for COVID. Government requirement regarding masks has also required consideration, although our staff are not mandated by the order. Council is choosing to supply customer-facing staff with the P2 and N95 masks. We have written guidelines for staff on these, and each business unit has procured them for staff. We've issued guidelines on travel, particularly with the borders opening soon. We have reviewed our FAQs for staff and managers based on red level. We have registered for the rapid antigen testing close contact exemption scheme with priority 1 critical roles. And some of those roles, for example, are cemeteries, arborists, tenancy services, parking, solid waste, roading repairs, civil defence, facilities management, health, safety and security, building safety assessments, etc. We will now draft a RATS policy for consultation with staff and unions on how we will use RATS, etc. Just in terms of the protest response, obviously can't go into a lot of detail, but our key role is to ensure we have measures in place to keep staff safe in whatever activity or task they are doing on behalf of the city. Providing advice and support when required has been a key focus for my team. We are focusing on security measures for council sites and in terms of supporting our parking officers as they work through their requirements as well. I'm happy to take any questions at any stage.
Thank you. I do have a couple of questions myself. I can't see any of the hands up. Just on, you talked about the reporting system. Is that reporting system going to enable elected members to be able to more easily log
Yes,
any concerns they may have?
As we've worked through the process of mapping out requirements, that is one of the requirements that we have put in as part of our procurement for the new system. So, you know, we are excited to see what tenders we do get to make all of our lives a bit easier in this space with all reporting. And on clause 28 of the substantive paper around health and safety, it was in the audit and risk, was around elected members' due diligence. And I note that we do have a workshop scheduled, I think, next month, but it's been quite some time since the last one. And I wonder whether we need to do more in terms of making sure that we are, we are undertaking due diligence. Yes, definitely. So yeah, look, I mean, it does list there some of the legislative due diligence requirements. Yeah. I think one of the things that has happened because of COVID and you know, we do need to get into a space of how we continue operating in this space in a COVID world is obviously understanding some of the, you know, the nature of operations and the hazards associated with that, and by getting out and about and doing some of the observations as elected members is key to that. And so we do want to ensure that we can do that in a safe way and continue doing that sort of stuff. And that will lead into, I guess, understanding what's going out or happening out there and what our requirements are. So that would be an area as elected members that we can definitely continue improving on.
So are you envisaging that you'll find ways that we can conduct those health and safety observations even within the sort of, the changing conditions really at the moment?
Yeah, in the current climate, I mean, we definitely want to be able to continue doing these in a safe way.
Yeah.
The team's currently working with business units so that we can continue doing some of those observations ourselves, and whatever learnings that we're getting from that, we'll certainly be passing on to elected members so that we can continue that as well.
Thank you, Wendy. Now we have a couple of questions. Councillor Symes, your hand's now down. You're okay? Okay. Councillor Foon.
Kia ora, Wendy. Just the personal confrontation numbers are more than astounding and disturbing, and especially when you read one of the incidences that the team are having to go through. I guess, how are the team faring in general? And I know I try and ask this question, but are we confident that we are doing enough to support them? Because obviously maintaining their health and well-being and making sure that they're comfortable to stay in their roles at Wellington City Council is really important.
Yes, definitely. Look, that's a great question. I mean, first and foremost, we need to make sure that our staff are safe, and we do provide some resources and tools for that to happen. One of the things that we have seen, we have seen an increase in reporting, and that is a good thing as well. So where we prior we weren't getting that sort of reporting coming through, so we've really encouraged people to not tolerate some of the behaviours that we are seeing, in their day-to-day jobs and things like that, and we are encouraging them to report as much as possible. So that has seen the increase in all sorts of reporting from one extreme to the other, but we're definitely going to continue to encourage that. My team that reports through to me, we are changing the way that we're operating and working, and we're a lot closer to the business units, and we've now implemented a business partner model that we're rolling out at the moment. So we're in the stage of sort of forming that business partner model, and then we'll obviously step into those roles. And we're already seeing a greater level of support to the business units, especially those that are experiencing more and more personal confrontation. So having that immediate response and support from my team is key. Like you said, we want to make sure that people feel safe doing their job. And so we need to continue to wrap that support, around them.
Thank you, Wendy. Councillor O'Neill.
Kia ora, thank you, Wendy. Just looking at the results, I know that your team and many others have put in a lot of work into the diversity and inclusion policy and internal policy. And I was just wondering how, when we assess risk, how much of this information or anything was shed light on that that you're using in that internal policy? Like what learnings we're taking from the report here today into potential changes that we might be doing internally.
Yeah, in terms of reporting, I have mentioned before, the data, data is only as good as how you're going to use it, and I don't want to be the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff, and that's why I am excited about the procurement of a new health and safety management system, because I want to, it's very hard to get ahead of the game, but if we can do that in this space across our organisation, then it will help with some of the trends and knowing, rather than being the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff, we're actually being proactive in this space. So by using some of the reporting that we're getting and proactively managing trends and getting across it early is the space that we kind of want to be in. I know that might not answer your question specifically, but in what you've asked, but yeah, I definitely want us to get into a space where what the reporting is telling us is, you know, we can get ahead of it and start managing it in a way where we are mitigating anything, you know, sort of going forward, and especially managing some of those risks a bit more proactively.
Cool, kia ora, thank you.
Thank you. It doesn't seem to be any further questions. So, Councillor Condi, would you like to move this?
Sure, happy to do that. Thank you. I just want to thank the team for all the work that they've been doing, you know, particularly around COVID and getting our organisation prepared to deal with moving into the red traffic light setting, and everything that that entails has been incredibly complex. And I know that you've worked across every single business unit in the organisation. You've collected an enormous amount of data in a really short period of time to enable us to move into that red traffic lighting setting really quickly and efficiently. And I think it's been extraordinary, given the size of our organisation and the number of different services we provide, actually how seamless that has pretty much been in the last little while. So we just can't commend you enough for all of that. Thank you, Councillor Foon, for asking the questions about personal confrontation. That's always a key concern of ours at Audit and Risk as well. It's concerning to see how much those numbers are rising, even just over last year, where they had risen, you know, they rose significantly after the first lockdown, and then they've risen again since then quite significantly. But it is also great to hear that we're hearing some of those numbers are going up because we're encouraging reporting, because we're taking a zero tolerance approach. And those things are really encouraging, but it's clearly something that we're really struggling with across the organisation and need to keep a close eye on. It's great to see the progress of the IT project. I think that is going to make a huge difference to the data that we're able to collect and use, and how easy it is for people to use the system. One of the things I'm always keeping an eye on is near miss reporting. I like to see our near miss reporting going up, because for me, that's an indication that people are actually using our systems, and again, are taking a really proactive approach towards health and safety. I particularly like seeing when our minor and moderate near misses go up, but our severe near misses don't. So to me, that emphasises the fact that people are reporting minor incidents, and that shows that we're really getting a good culture around that. So I think the new IT system can really support a lot of that as well. So it's great to see all of that. So just thank you to the team for your work, and I commend this report to the Committee of the Whole. Can I have a seconder, please? To the Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, thank you. Deputy Mayor, do you wish to speak?
Just to say that I think a lot of good things have been said so far, actually, and I think that we are on a good pathway. Not to say that something can't go wrong, but I think we're really aware of what we need to do to try and prevent that. And I do endorse the need for us to have some more site visits. Unfortunately, we've made a lot of arrangements to have them, but they've been cancelled by COVID. But that doesn't mean we should give up. And even if they have to go down to being one-on-one, you know, there are a few of us who do need to catch up on some. Our goal was to have at least one a year, but preferably two. So just remind elected members of that. But thank you to the staff. There's, I think, some very good systems in place, and I feel a sense of confidence myself. Thank you.
Yeah, and I will just briefly speak. I just want to echo the Deputy Mayor's comments. I do have a high level of confidence in the system. I know it's on a real continuous improvement roadmap, and that's great. But it is at a high level already, and I think we also appreciate the challenges, because the environment's changing consistently out there, and I know staff are continually having to pivot. What was right one day is maybe not quite as good the next day. So thank you, officers, for the work that you're doing, and thank you to the City Council staff in particular for helping to make this organisation a much better place to work from a health and safety perspective. So thank you. Are there any other speakers? Councillor Conti, right of reply?
I think everything's been said. Thank you.
That's all right. Okay, so I will now put the motion forward, which is basically receive the information in this report. Could you please vote?
That's 14 votes in favour, carried unanimously.
Okay, thank you. Motion carried. We are now moving on to the second part of the Audit and Risk Subcommittee report, which is around water activity rate setting. Could I ask the questions for this and maybe officers just to talk to this on the aspects that came from the Audit and Risk Committee? The reason being is we're going to have a more fulsome conversation on the following paper, which will look at what we as a committee decide what needs to be done. So perhaps if officers, if there are any, if we've got officers there, we've got Sarah Hay, and I think it's just focusing on the views of the Audit and Risk Committee in terms of this, and whether you just want to do a brief introduction, Sarah.
Sure, thanks, Chair. So the purpose of the paper that was presented to Audit and Risk was to outline the nature of the error that occurred in the water activity rate setting. The paper also spoke to the fact that we picked that error up through our regular management reporting of revenue and expenses, and noticed a reduction of the revenue that we were expecting to see from water rates. We then looked through a number of avenues of how that error could have happened and identified where the root cause was. The error in nature was when we do the rates modelling, it's actually a bit of a beast of Excel spreadsheets, 6 of them in a model that work together and pull an enormous amount of data and then do the rates processing. That all the information was correct in that rates modelling. The error occurred when we published the rates from the model into the rate setting papers. So when we copied the information, the rate and the dollar for all of the activities, a link broke and reverted to the 2019-2020 year and copied that information across, which was lower than what we had included in the rates model. So the error was identified. And then the third purpose of the audit and risk paper was to detail the steps that we've taken to rectify the error. So the rates models, spreadsheets, have been replaced by a system, an automated rating model system called IVIS. This year we will run the two, when we do the rate strikes, we'll run the two in parallel. So we'll do the rates models and the spreadsheets for one last time and then give it a farewell party, and as well as running the model in the system and make sure that we've got that extra point of reconciliation and checking before we retire the models. Then we looked at what legal avenues do we have or what ability do we have to right the wrong effectively. There are some constraints under the Local Government Act, so you can either replace or reset the rates. You can't replace the rates if what you want to replace it with is a higher rate than what you've published, so that avenue is unavailable to us. And resetting the rates requires a special consultative procedure where we consult with all ratepayers, even though the error only impacted volumetric water users, so metered users. And effectively, that consultation process plus the administrative burden of affecting my rates team having to go back and recalculate all of those costs for water meters actually is an administrative task that they can't possibly do by the end of this fiscal year. So we recommended that the Audit and Risk Committee note all of those things and recommend to Council via Finance and Performance that any deficit at the end of the year is debt funded, which we'll go to in the next paper. But happy to take questions on any of the other elements.
Councillor Condie.
Thank you. One of the things we talked about, Sarah, at Audit and Risk was how tricky the error was to find. One of the questions we had was like, why didn't the auditor notice that the error was there? Can you just talk us through? I found that quite useful to understand why this had happened and why it wasn't kind of easy to find it at the time when it was made.
Yeah. The nature of the reconciliations that the auditors would be doing are on the rates strike, so the rate setting paper, which is where we put, number of ratepayers times rate X revenue, and you can go through and you can reconcile. For the water charges, because it's on the water meters, we didn't publish the expected volume. So the auditors actually couldn't, and neither could my team, go rate times volume equals expected revenue. And then there was a fixed charge that was also incorrect and linked to the 1920 year. And because it was only about 120 grand, it was lost in the rounding, so it wasn't picked up in the reconciliation either. So just a bunch of very manual processes, and it was only for a staff member who had previously run the rates model woke up in the middle of the night and went, I wonder if it's that link broken, and went in and, you know, did the reconciliation and found it. So yes, very manual, and very pleased to be moving away from that approach.
Thank you. Councillor Young.
Thank you. So I speak as someone who has a water meter, and but I'll come to that in a moment. But what I'm concerned about is the paper says this is more transparent and practical, but is it really the only option? I'm horrified to think that you guys are going to be funding my water bill. I don't see why you should.
Councillor Young, just one thing, we'll answer that question, but just to note that we're going to have a bigger debate in the next paper around whether that's the right course of action.
But is this really the only thing is to borrow the money? That's the only option, because it just says more transparent, it doesn't say it's the only.
So Councillor Young, the audit and risk paper spoke to debt funding being the sort of the practicable way forward, and the F&P, the Finance and Performance Committee paper, does go through some of those other options that you could do. So at the end of the year, regardless of what we resolve now, if there are underlying surpluses, those will offset that lost revenue anyways. We as an organisation are obviously trying really hard to contain costs, and we will continue to do that. So if there is a positive position at the end of the year, that will help offset that. We do know that there are revenue challenges, and that this won't be the only area where we're facing revenue pressures. Next year, as you'll be resolving through the annual plan, long-term plan committee process, water metered customers will be experiencing a larger step up than non-metered customers, because this year you paid less. You will, when you get the correct rate next year, it will feel like a greater increase than all other users. So you will still be then paying the right amount, even though you've kind of had a year grace, could we say.
So what sort of precedent does this set for when other mistakes are made, that we just say we make a mistake say a mistake is made with the rates calculation and we find that people aren't paying the right rates, do we do the same thing again? I mean, it just seems horrifying to me.
So Councillor Young, it's a question of materiality. Absolutely, if we had set an error in the general rates, we would have noticed that from a revenue perspective much earlier, and we would have time to do a resetting process. If we had been overcharging ratepayers, very easy to fix. You can replace that rate without having to consult. When you're undercharging them, because you've published a rate and we've been rating in accordance with what we've said, to change that, it is a much more laborious process. And given where we are in the year and the other things that we're consulting on at this point of time, the consultation engagement resource required, and then the team's effort to redo that calculation and recharge all of those users is extremely challenging. It's not what we would recommend.
So just one last question. I believe the three largest water users, because there aren't many metered residential users, I think 650. So the three biggest users are, is it the DHB, the Meatworks and the council?
Yes.
So we pay water rates to ourselves. So we are asking Wellingtonians to fund borrowings. It just seems like Kafkaesque to me.
It is frustrating, however, it's the legislative environment that we operate within.
Okay. Deeply unhappy, but thank you.
Our Chief Executive looks like she might be trying to add something.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, I just want to add that I think it's important we emphasise that the recommendation is to approve debt funding if necessary. I would add that you've already set in this year's budget a $10 million organisational saving to reduce rates impact. And of course, anything we can do to mitigate challenges like this, we will do organisationally, just as you are asking us in next year's budget to find another $15 million worth of savings. So I think an important public message is that this organisation takes those efforts seriously. This is not just a view that any issue will be covered by debt, but it's appropriate and prudent for the council to give us that approval should we need it, because that is the only way we can rectify this, as the Chief Financial Officer has said.
Thank you, Barbara. I mean, I get it. I just feel concerned that there are people who are really struggling in Wellington who will be paying interest on my unpaid water rates. It bothers me. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Young. Mayor Foster.
Thanks, Chair. Look, my question is not, I mean, I get the debt bit, but it's really goes to how we pay the debt off. I think the intention is to pay it off over a 10-year period, but using rates. My question is whether, in fact, we have to use rates to pay it off over that period of time, or whether we could actually apply that to the water meter charges and do it over that time.
Yes, thanks, Mayor. We will go through all of that detail in the finance and performance paper.
Figured you'd say that. Cool. Okay, we'll leave that as a question for the next paper then.
Will do.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Free.
Yeah, thank you. And may I just say, I'm glad we did have the systems to actually pick it up eventually, even if it wasn't, it was good that it was found. And thank you for being diligent about looking for unusual trends or whatever it was that alerted you to it. I guess, look, this is probably just reinforcing something that you've already said, but basically you're saying the materiality of this difference is not high, and we don't yet know the exact quantum, but it's not likely to be high, and that the most efficient way from staff time, resource, generating extra bills and what have you, is to take this debt approach in the short term and then see what else can be done. Does that basically sum it up?
Yes, because thanks, Deputy Mayor. Because of the constraints of the Local Government Rating Act as well, because we can't just reset it, that would be or replace it, that would be easy, and we would probably be able to get on and do it. But with the requirement for consultative procedure and other aspects, it would be difficult.
And the other thing, I guess, to clarify is people are still paying water rates, they're just not paying the higher rate that we intended. So, Nicola, you're not getting away with not paying anything.
That's correct.
Thank you. Councillor Condon.
Thank you. Sarah, I guess just for further clarification, can you explain to us kind of what the risks would be if we decided to go against officer advice and ask you to reset the rate, in terms of you're saying you don't have the human resources to do that work? What would happen if we tried to do it? What would the risks be?
The biggest risk that I see, Councillor Condi, is the risk to day-to-day operations. So they're the same team who has to do the rate strike, who are upgrading current technology, who have churn like every other part of this organisation, and we're training new staff. I currently have a seconded manager down from Auckland Council into that role because we don't have a manager in that space yet. So the biggest risk would be that the wheels would come off the day-to-day operations, and we would get further behind trying to catch up, would be my biggest concern. But I'm sure if the consultation team was on, they might have something to add as well around the current workload and what we're talking to Wellingtonians about at the moment and how crowded that space is. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I've just got one question. It's just about the actual recommendation. If we accepted that, I know the recommendations come from Audit and Risk, but they're asking us to recommend this course of action to council. And I'm not sure whether we can actually do that, given that we are debating this in another paper about what we are going to recommend to council. So I wonder whether officers could just think about that. It's not about not accepting the information from Audit and Risk, but it's about what we now decide to do as a committee.
Chair, I think that you'll see the wording is consider recommending to council, and so by receiving the other paper, you're quite thoroughly considering the recommendation against some other options. So I think you can accept that recommendation and you show your consideration through the other paper.
Yeah, it's
Does
just
that make sense?
Yeah, I know. It's just that when I read it, I having reread it, I see consider debt funding, but then it says and recommend this course of action. So I'm not sure whether another way to consider, but if officers understand that to be the case, then that's fine.
Any advice, Heidi? Are you okay with the wording?
I'm okay with the wording. The other thing we could change is by adding an ing to recommending. So consider debt funding the revenue loss if necessary resulting from the error in rate settings and recommending this course of action to council. So that makes it a little bit more clear that it's considering recommending.
If Councillor Conde, who will be moving this paper, is comfortable with that.
Perfect.
Okay, all right. So what we will do is we will I will ask Councillor Conde now, I don't think there's any other questions, to move this paper. And once this paper is finished, we will take a break.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to start by emphasising something that Bruce Robertson said when he introduced this paper at the Audit and Risk Subcommittee, which is to say I really want to acknowledge the excellent honesty and integrity that we have seen in our CFO and staff in coming forward with this error as quickly as they have, and just ask everyone to during debate to consider that if we want an organisational culture where mistakes like this quickly get found and rectified and brought to our attention, then we need to treat that with respect when it happens, and just invite everyone to consider that. I think I've always said to staff that mistakes happen, that's human nature, and what's really important is once they're found that they're dealt with as quickly and effectively as we can. I think the conversation that we had at subcommittee about how we can fix this error was quite frustrating. So Councillor Young, I hear your frustration, and that was a topic of conversation at the subcommittee, was about what our actual options were, legally speaking, under the Local Government Act. What can we do to try and address and fix this error? But the reality, as you've heard, is that we can't replace the rate. That's not a legal option. We could reset the rate. That is a legal option, but our CFO is giving us very strong advice that that would be a very risky course of action. And as you would imagine, this Audit and Risk Subcommittee felt that they weren't comfortable with the amount of risk that would be associated with that. And so the view at the end of the day was that the best way forward for this is to debt fund the results of this error and just have the team focusing all of their efforts on improving our organisation so that an error like this can't happen again. And that's really where we've seen really fantastic response again from the CFO and all the team in terms of changing the processes, the IT changes that have been made, or getting expertise down from Auckland Council. Again, we're very grateful to the managers there who released those people to come and help us. All of those things have been fantastic responses, and that's really where we want staff to be putting all of their effort. So while I have a lot of sympathy for the idea that shouldn't we just be able to quickly fix these bills, I do want staff to be putting their efforts in making sure that our systems are coming up to speed and things like this simply can't happen again. I also just want to acknowledge that this was a really tricky error to find. Even once the staff identified that there was something going not quite right with the revenue, and that they felt like that was coming under where they were expecting it. It was actually a really tricky area to find, and I don't know, this may be an experience that not everybody can share, but having that feeling of waking up in the middle of the night and thinking, oh, I think I know what cell of that spreadsheet has gone wrong, is certainly one that I've had. And I just want to thank all the staff who, that's a pretty uncomfortable place to be, and thank them for the attitude that they've had, bringing that to us and just getting it sorted as quickly as we can. And I'd like to ask for a seconder, please, perhaps someone who's on the committee.
We got a seconder. Was it Councillor Pannett?
Councillor Pannett.
Thank you. Councillor Panic, do you wish to speak? Thank you. Are there any other speakers? Can I just briefly add and just endorse Councillor Condi's comments? I listened in on the subcommittee, and I know the subcommittee gave a robust review of the situation, in particular from a system perspective. And I feel a high level of confidence in that we are now on the right track. Actually, someone who has actually been in charge of a rating system, I know how difficult it is to deal with this, to find the errors and then find a way to rectify it. And knowing the legislation around rating, it's even more complex. So I take on board the officer's recommendations that it's not appropriate to look at rating it differently in this current rating year. So I'm very happy to support the recommendation. Okay, any other speakers? Councillor Condi, you not like a right reply, thank you. So we will, I'll put forward the recommendation. I think it was on screen just before. And if you could please vote, thank you.
It's 15 votes in favour, carried unanimously.
Excellent. So now I'm proposing that we now take a break until 10:45. So you've got 14 minutes, and then we'll get back into this and see how quickly we get through the rest. Thank you. All good from your end, Haydee?
Yes, all good. Just a reminder that audio is still live streamed during adjournments.
Okay. Welcome back, everyone. If you are there, if you could, if elected members could turn the screens on so that Democracy Services know who's there and who's not. Just give it a few more, 30 seconds more. Hello, Councillor Rush. Okay, all right. Well, I think we'll make a start. If see if we've got. I think we still haven't got Councillor Condi or the Mayor. So, but maybe when they join in, they could just turn their screens on for a minute. Thank you, Councillor Condi. Answers just Councillor Young and the Mayor. All right, let's get started. Next paper is the water activities rate setting. We have just covered that a wee bit with officers already, but can I just ask for officers just to touch again on this paper and understand not so much about how the error occurred, but actually about the rationale for the debt funding.
Thank you, Chair. So this paper acknowledges that at the end of this financial year, there may be a deficit in the water activity due to the incorrect rate being struck or set. What we are trying to do current year is manage within our envelope and do everything we can to come in on budget. However, we know that there are challenges and headwinds, and the difficult thing with forecasting what this era is going to look like at a year-end result is because it's a rate on a volume. So we forecast what water usage will be over a year, but often we don't get that right. There's multiple factors at play: how efficient new appliances, how many new apartment buildings are there, what's happening with the weather. People like to use sprinklers more when it's hotter, all that kind of stuff. So it is sometimes difficult to exactly nail what the year-end water usage will be. And so understanding what this era will look like from a dollar perspective at the end of the year is an estimate at the moment. If we come in on budget from a volumes perspective, it will be around the $3 million mark. At the end of the year, when Council receives the annual report and you get your final financial statements, through that process, you understand where our costs and revenues have landed and if there's an underlying surplus or deficit. If there's an underlying surplus, that's great. There is no problem here. We won't have to take any action. We wouldn't need to debt fund or take any of the other potential options that are outlined in this paper. If there is an underlying deficit because of the balanced budget principle, we would need to do something to show that our revenues are in line with our expenditure. And to do that, to balance the budget, we're suggesting that the only way to do that at the moment without knowing what that impact is would be to debt fund it. And we have slightly amended the substantive, if Heidi could bring that up just so I could talk through. While that's coming up, some of the options that we looked at, we didn't go straight to debt funding. The other options that we looked at are outlined in the paper, but one of the things you could do to fund the lost revenue is increase non-rates revenue. We know we've got these constraints about how we can increase the rates revenue from the legislation, but increasing non-rates revenue is another avenue that we looked at. Mainly our non-rates revenue comes from our investment portfolio of the airport and our ground leases, but also parking. We didn't think that there was a practicable way of doing that before the end of the year, so that's not a recommended option. When you want to increase fees and charges, also we should do some form of consultation process for that, and we're not recommending that that's a good option in the current year either. Another lever you can pull is decreasing your costs or looking at service level reductions. We don't believe at this time of the year we should be consulting on service level reductions with the community, so that was taken out as a preferred option. The other issue with reducing service levels is that we would need to be looking for those service levels to be reduced within the water activity, and it's probably it's not officer advice to be reducing service levels on maintenance in the water activity. So that's not a recommended option either. Then we could increase the organisational savings. That is a genuine option, and we did look at whether we could do that. If this wasn't this year, given the headwinds we have with escalating remuneration, supply chain issues, COVID impacting the cost of goods and services, this would probably be the preferred option given the materiality of it. We could probably do something from an organisational perspective. But given this year where we already have $10 million of operational and organisational savings baked into our budget and the pressures we're feeling, this is not achievable. And so if we'd recommended this as an option, it would be potentially setting the organisation up to fail. And so then at the end of the year, you would debt fund the lost revenue anyway. So that wasn't transparent. So the final option was recommending via debt if any, underlying deficit at the end of the year. Now, so this year the process would be any surplus offsets this, and what we're actually recommending is that even though that lost revenue will be debt funded, at the end of the 22-23 financial year, if there's an underlying surplus, that be used to offset this lost revenue as well. So the impact of this for Wellington ratepayers is only felt over a small period of time. And the updated substantive that's up on the screen is just on recommendation number 3, to recommend to Council, should debt funding be required, that any surplus at the end of the 22-23 financial year be used to pay down that debt as the first priority. Happy to take questions.
Okay. So just to clarify, Sarah, that when we tag something as a priority to be paid out of surplus, that the council's accounting systems can manage that.
Yes, Madam Chair, we can do that.
Yeah. Sorry, it's a bit of a patsy question, but I just... Yeah, okay. All right. Because that was just in response to the other thing. Okay, Councillor Condie.
Thank you. Sarah, I just want to understand, if we agree today that we want to debt fund this this revenue shortfall, that doesn't mean that the organisation couldn't possibly still deliver organisational savings, and that you won't try to deliver organisational savings. Is that correct?
Absolutely. So we're doing all we can to be fiscally prudent through this financial year. We know that we are meeting the year-to-date savings targets, but we also have flagged, I think, through the Chief Executive's Performance Committee, that there are pressures on that, given other things that are happening in the just with the labour market, and our two big buckets of spend outside of depreciation are our remuneration costs and our third-party supply costs, and we've got challenges on both of those.
Thank you. Mayor Foston.
Thanks, Chair. Look, my question, Sarah, is, so if we essentially pay it out of surplus, that's surplus which we could otherwise have used, to improve our overall performance. If we're paying it out of, I completely get the debt funding bit, I agree with that, but it's whether you actually need to use the surplus to basically pay it off lock, stock and barrel, which effectively was what you're suggesting, or whether you actually pay it over a period of time. And then if you pay it over a period of time, do you take it from rates, or do you take it from, which is where I was going before, do you take it from slightly increasing the water charges over a period of time to pay it back through the water charges? So my question really is in two parts, what the implications are of allocating the surplus this way as opposed to helping us near any other financial objective, and secondly, whether, regardless of whether you pay it off or don't pay it off, whether we could actually adjust the water charges over an extended period of time so they're not too markedly higher.
So through you, Chair, and thank you, Mayor, two parts to that question. The use of the surplus to improve performance, I'll address that part first. So you'll recall that at the end of the last fiscal year, through the annual report process, Council resolved to use the $23 million underlying surplus to pay down some of those operational debt-funded operational costs faster to reduce the rates burden. And officers will likely be making similar recommendations about surpluses in the future to get, because you're paying that debt off over a shorter period of time, the rates impost is quite high, and so to remove that as quickly as possible has been our recommendation. It will continue to be until we're in a more prudent space, and that's not to say that the reasons for that debt weren't valid, right? That we're talking about things like the shock from COVID, we're talking about the library closures, we're talking about things that have happened that we've had to respond to at short notice. But we would like to be able to remove that impost off the general rates. The second part is, should there be no surpluses and we do debt fund and need to repay that over time, we would recommend that repayment and those costs come out of the water activity over a 10-year period. So if you're looking at $3 million, it's a sort of 300k plus some interest over a 10-year period added to the water activity. So the general rates don't pay for it, the water activity would.
So that if we were not to do it through the water activity, we would compromise our ability to be able to pay down the debt, the short-term debt, COVID-related debt faster. That's clear. And so if we're putting it through the water-related activity, we can presumably make the decision that it will be through the metered part of the water-related activity as opposed to the unmetered part of the water-related activity.
Just the way that the rate's the same, and so there's a differential in there that would split between commercial and residential. So it might not be that pure, but we would attempt to make it pure. But yeah, there's just some rating challenges in how you actually apply that, but that would be the principle that would drive the way you set the rates. I thought the thing that I would add to that is this will not impact next year's rates. It is too hard we have to strike the rates, 30 June this year. We won't know what the year-end impact is until that time or after, so we can't retrospectively add it to the water rates for next year. So it will be an impact. If there is debt that needs to be repaid, it would be from the 23-24 year onwards.
So my final part of the question, if we're to give that sort of guidance that we're happy at being paid back through the water part of the business, but we would like it to be paid by the people who effectively got the benefit from having the reduced amount this time, i.e. the people who are using water meters, Councillor Young and her included, then I'm just asking you, what kind of wording would you need to give you that kind of guidance?
It's already in the paper that it be paid through the water activity.
No, it's been more specific, that subsection of the water activity.
We could look at a principle that those positively impacted should wear the burden, something like that.
If you can give some thought to that, then I'd be very happy to support that sort of direction. Thank you.
Thank you. And it sounds like we might be able to do something through the substantive mayor. Just one follow-on question to that. Would it be possible that by the end of 2022-23, before we strike the rates for the 23-24 year, anything that's left unpaid of this under revenue gathering, could that be added to the rates, the water rates for those ones with meters? Could that be added in for the 23-24 rating year, so that it all gets, whatever's left over is actually cleared through rating?
So thank you, Chair. The committee could recommend to council that say if we get to the end of the year and the total impact was $3 million, that not next year, because we won't know it in time for next year's rate strike, but the year after you could add that full debt repayment over 1 year. That could be that's possible. It would be, around the bounds of 1% rates increase for that year, or just under 1% rates increase for that year. So it would be material, but the committee could resolve to repay it quickly.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And so that would be, but it would still be part of a targeted rate, essentially, would it? Or because
it's funded through the water rates activity.
Because it's funded
the water activity.
Yeah. So it would only apply to those ones with a water meter.
Yes, to do that, we would just need to change the R&F policy for the water activity to enable the water metered customers to pick up that revenue loss.
Okay. I will take some advice from the mayor, but given this, whatever we recommend will go to council next week. And I think there's still some opportunities if these recommendations need to be refined. They could be done at council. Yeah, so I think that might be the easy way to do that, rather than spend a lot of time finessing.
Madam Chair, we could, similar to this paper, we could provide based on the principles of what this committee resolves, we could provide options of how that is funded and for what period and through what activity, for example. We could add that into the council options paper.
Mayor, would you be comfortable in that approach?
Look, I think maybe if you could just simply put a recommendation that says that officers are asked to provide further advice as to how within the water part of the budget, this is repaid over time. Something along those lines will be fine.
Could I just note that those council papers go out today, so it might be next month that we aim for if I have to write a paper. Is that okay if it comes in?
That's fine by me. I'm conscious that next, the immediately upcoming council meeting is much busier than the following one, so that probably would actually work quite well.
Thank you.
So Sarah, would you be saying that this paper this recommendation from this committee won't go to council this month, but the following month?
Yes, following month.
Yeah, okay. All right. So do we want I'm happy to add it into substantive, an extra recommendation. Just trying to think of the wording. Are we recommending to council? Or
Yes.
we're asking officer advice?
I think you could just add to recommendation number 3 after as a priority, including options for term and source of funding. So, repayment term and funding source.
Yeah.
Yep.
Heidi, have you got that?
Including options for repayment.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Mary, are you comfortable with that? I take it the minute. Okay.
I just gave a thumbs up, so I don't know.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see that. Okay, sorry. All right. Well, I will move.
Can we see it again, please?
Sorry?
Can we see it again, please?
Yep.
It flashed fast.
Okay. All right. Well, I will move these recommendations. Thank you, officers, for providing us with the advice, and also thank you, officers, for the transparency in terms of raising this issue in the first place. I think it's a bit like our health and safety. It's important to report even near misses, as opposed to even if things actually do happen, and that we have a culture that enables that to happen. I think whilst I would have loved to have charged water rate holders, water meter holders, I believe it's just not possible. But if we follow these recommendations, what that will enable us for officers to go away and just give us a few more, a bit more information, a bit more analysis that we can then finally determine at the council meeting about how we deal with that. But this also enables us to consider ensuring that the lost revenue is collected as soon as possible. And it's probably something worthwhile to note also for the annual plan committee. When we're thinking about funding for next year, are we enabling this amount to be paid back sooner rather than later? So I just wonder if I have a seconder. I've got Mayor Foster.
Can I just say before it's seconded that the wording's not terribly clear, in my view. I just wonder if it could be tightened up a little bit. If we look again at what the amendment was, I was going to suggest that it be paid down debt as a first priority and include further options for repayment term and funding source. It just seems to bang the two things together a little bit much, which I think we're talking about. Yep.
Yep.
Or just to say and include further options rather than just the including. I know you have to do that before it's seconded. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Free. Mayor Foster.
Yeah, look, thank you very much. I just wanted to agree with all the comments that have been made. I think we're all coming from the same place as this. Councillor Condi, I wanted to agree with your comments in the previous discussion about the being transparent, acknowledging mistakes and addressing them and moving forward. And I think that's exactly the right thing. I'm conscious that the editor of the Dominion Post has taken government agencies to task for lack of transparency. And I think it's really, really good that we are being transparent, saying, whoops, we got this one wrong, and we are working to fix it. The second thing I wanted to say is I just wanted to say, Sarah, to you and to your team, thank you for the work that you're doing in improving our systems and also making sure we've got the people and the structures to be able to make sure that our financial systems are more robust and more efficient. And I think that's really, really important. So that's part of the putting right. Third thing I wanted to say is just that while some people at the time were a bit angry about what had happened, the reality is we haven't lost any money. All that has happened is we have not charged people the amount that we should have done. And this paper is about seeking to recover that over time. We can't print money, so anything we don't receive that we were probably initially expecting, we've got to pick up over time. And the final thing I wanted to say is that I think that we probably are all looking to make sure that the right people are paying for the services they received. In this case, people have consumed water, and we want to make sure that those are the people that are paying for that water, so that it's a fair. We've always had a very fair approach to the way in which water is paid for, in terms of the non-metered and the metered sector, and this is looking to try to find a way to make sure that the metered sector is the one that pays, but doesn't get a massive whack in one hit, but it's paid for over a period of time. So hopefully we can end up with something that actually works well for everybody. It's fair, it's transparent, and we rectify the issues. So thank you. Happy to second.
Thank you, Mayor. Would anybody else like to speak? No, great. Well, I'm not going to say exercise my right of reply. So is everyone comfortable if we take those recommendations all together? Because, okay, so I'll now put forward the motion for these recommendations. Please vote accordingly.
That's 14 votes in favour, carried unanimously.
Thank you. Okay, the next paper is the dissolution of the Wellington Regional Strategy Committee. And I welcome Jim Robertson and Stephen MacArthur to introduce the report.
Thanks, Chair. Morena, everybody. I'll introduce the report. Look, this report is as a consequence of the dissolution of the Wellington Regional Strategy Committee in May last year. It's necessitated the need to review the governance arrangements for Wellington NZ. And previously, the Regional Strategy Committee had oversight of monitoring Wellington NZ, but of course, with the dissolution of that committee, those responsibilities have returned back to the shareholding councils, those being Greater Wellington at 20% shareholding and Wellington City Council at 80%. So the practical effect of that is that the shareholders agreement needs to be updated to reflect that, and it's principally around three areas: the statement of expectations and SOI process, the reporting and appointments to the boards, and those things are being reflected in the report. So essentially, and we're already partway through this process, the statement of expectations this time round was a joint statement of expectations that we put together with Greater Wellington and ourselves towards the end of last year. Wellington NZ is currently working on their SOI, so that'll come back to both shareholding councils. The reporting, obviously through this committee for Wellington City, and the reporting will also go to Greater Wellington in respect to their interests. The appointments to the board will be led by Wellington City Council. Obviously, we will consult and get the input of Greater Wellington, and obviously the board chair will also be involved in that process. So those are the main areas, and the formal sign off of the shareholders agreement will follow the consideration by this committee. But really, it's an update to reflect those changes as I've outlined.
Thank you, Stephen. Are there any questions of officers? No. Well, your paper's obviously been absolutely crystal clear, and well done. So look, I will move this paper, and just a note from me. I've sat on this regional strategy committee committee for about 4 or 5 years. I was very unclear on what value it actually added, and so I think because we actually have good reporting regimes into not only our council but also Greater Wellington Regional Council, that certainly makes it a bit more streamlined and probably makes life a lot easier for Wellington NZ in terms of reducing any duplication of reporting. So I'm very happy to move these recommendations. I wonder whether the Mayor might like to second it, if he's still there.
I've just got to find the button to push the mute. Yeah, happy to do that.
Yeah, thank you. Would you like to speak?
No, I don't. Other than say I don't disagree with your comments about the achievements. But I probably would say that, I mean, obviously there is thinking about regional economic development, quite a lot of thinking about regional economic development, and obviously that's going to be interesting to see how that is both funded and also the structures which are required to deliver it, and that's very much a bit of a crystal ball at the moment.
Okay, thank you. And I think no one else wishes to speak. So look, we'll go straight to the vote. Now put the motion forward. Take them all together. Please vote.
Just waiting. Oh, never mind. That's 14 votes in favour, carried unanimously.
Thank you. And we'll now move on to paper 2.4, appointments to council-controlled organisations, and this is regarding a councillor or elected member appointment to the organisation of Experience Wellington. I'll welcome Stephen to introduce this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Look, this is a fairly straightforward report in terms of Councillor Covet standing down from the Experience Wellington board, and the need for the council to make an appointment. So you'll see the report has a gap in terms of the name, and I think it's probably up for, I'm not quite sure whether it's you, Chair, or the Mayor to move who that appointment would be.
I believe the Mayor's has got someone in that recommendation. Yeah. Questions? Mayor Foster. Oh, are you ready to vote? Oh my goodness. Well,
push the wrong buttons. Got a bit quick there. No, I was just simply saying I am looking forward to moving the motion. That's all, it's not a question.
Okay, can we have the motion up there, which is to, because in the papers it didn't have the councillor name in there. Thank you. So are you happy to move that, Mayor?
Yeah, look, very pleased to move this. First of all, can I just say, Councillor Calvert, thank you for your service on the Experience Wellington board. You've been enthusiastic, very strongly supportive, very protective of Experience Wellington, and I know that they are very grateful for that, and I'm very grateful for your contribution to Experience Wellington. I'm pleased to nominate Councillor Foon. Councillor Foon has a big interest in particularly the creative area around the arts. I know that she has participated already in a number of different forums that Experience Wellington's run. I think some board planning sessions. I know that the board is very welcoming of your appointment, and I know that you said to me that you couldn't do it before Christmas, but you're able to do it now. So I am delighted to move Councillor Foon as our new councillor appointee to the Experience Wellington board. And looking for a seconder.
I think Deputy Mayor Free was seconding. Deputy Free, would you like to speak?
And I'd just like to say a huge thank you to you, Councillor Covet, for the work that's been done over quite a few years now. And I know that you've really put a lot of thought and effort into supporting the board and being part of that board. And it's, you know, I'm sure they're sorry to lose you on one level, but I know that they're equally as excited to welcome Laurie. So I'm very, very happy to second this.
Thank you. And I will just speak very briefly. I just want to point out clause 5, my retirement is not, it was a resignation. I'm not retiring, not yet. So,
but also, just to say that the reason for your resignation is just that slight conflict with you now during this.
Yeah, I felt it better with being chair of the Finance and Performance Committee, and where the CCOs report into that, it would be there wasn't a direct conflict, but I just felt it was better for me just to have that arm's length more so. But I am very happy to support Councillor Foon. As the Mayor said, I know Councillor Foon's been to some, as an observer to a board meeting and to a strategy setting day. So so yes, I'm sure she'll carry on the good work. And I know the board are very happy to have an elected member on there. They want to keep the connection there with council, that direct connection, because of the benefits it brings. It does offer some challenges for elected members, because when you're on the board, you're on a board, but then you have your other role as an elected member, and we do our best to work through that as best as we can with support of our City Council officers. So yes, we're very happy to support this recommendation. Councillor Foon.
Kia ora tātou, and thank you very much, Mayor Foster, Deputy Mayor Free, and Councillor Calvert. Councillor Calvert, yes, I know that it's been said, but I will echo that I know the Wellington Experience Board are greatly appreciative of your time. For me particularly, the CCOs have been a major interest of mine since I've been on council. They bring many of our city's great stories, and that we as a council can't get so involved in, but they really bring a lot of enrichment to Wellington, our citizens, to our guests, and they bring a huge impact on our economic well-being. So it would be a privilege to be able to support them, particularly in this creative field. But what I really wanted to say was that I was able to sit in on the team strategy day, and I was really blown away by their team and the board, the dedication and commitment to their meaningful work. So it would just be a privilege to represent Wellington City Council on this board, and so I really ask for your support to enable that to happen. Thank you.
Thank you. No other speakers. Mayor Foster, write a reply.
Yeah, look, I just want to pick up two things. First of all, just to say, because I think you're all aware of it, but you may not be. Councillor Calvert signalled quite some time ago, with the new structure that we had, that she thought that it was appropriate to resign as a member of the Experience Wellington board for the reason she's given, in terms of the CCOs reporting through to the committee she's chairing. And I acknowledge that and think that's it's a good move that you've made, but you signalled it early, you gave time, and I think that that's been very well handled. And Councillor Foon, thank you for that recollection, or that sort of not recollection, but that sort of insight into the board session that you've had. My observation, having seen quite a number of our boards in action, not all of them, but in action within those board settings, is I think that is true across the board of our CCOs. And I think you've got a group of people, both the staff, the management, the boards of those CCOs, who are really committed to what is good for Wellington, and do a fantastic job. And what I think is also really fantastic is the way in which those boards also, or those CCOs also, are coming together so well, and they see themselves as part of a family together with the council, all collectively acting for the good of our city. So I think that's a really great culture that we've got in our CCO. So something I think we can all be, and they can all be very, very proud of.
Thank you, Mayor. So we'll move to the vote. I now put forward the motion, which has been moved and seconded. Please vote accordingly.
That's 14 votes in favour, carried unanimously.
Thank you all. Okay, we're getting there. 2.5, the forward programme. And are there any questions of officers before we move to debate? Just one note, I've asked officers to put on there will be an additional recommendation is that we do get a health and safety update monthly in between the quarterly reports. And that's driven by the situation of COVID, because things change very rapidly, very quickly. And it's important to have that governance oversight. Councillor O'Neill, did you have a question?
Just wanted to clarify that you said monthly updates.
Yeah.
Do you intend those to come to committee or every committee meeting?
No, yeah, every committee meeting in between the quarterly reports. Yeah, that we can have a verbal update with the quarterly reports that come via audit and risk, which are really focusing on the systems. This update is not so much about that information. It's more about just a point in time, in particular around the impacts of COVID on the health and safety of our staff. Yeah.
Just wanted to clarify if it was a briefing outside of the committee or just at committee.
It will be public, but obviously if there's some confidential information, we may not be able to discuss it in public. Deputy Mayor Free.
Just to check, and I'm pretty sure this is the case, but this is.
Sorry, I can't hear you. Sorry.
Oh, I don't know why. I'm not on mute. Just to check that this is all okay with the staff, and I'm sure it is, but just to make sure it's been, that they can have the capability to manage that increased reporting.
I think we
talk on behalf of Meredith, I think.
Yes, Meredith has seen the request from the chair, and she can do that.
To be clear, it's not a 20-page report with lots of spreadsheets. It's actually probably something that's a 2-page report, and was really just an update. It's not trying to provide that depth of reporting that we have quarterly. Okay. All right. So I don't think there's any more questions. So look, I will, Heidi, if you can put the recommendations up, but I will be moving that. I don't think I have to add anything further because we just clarified why that extra one is in there. Could I have a seconder, please? Councillor Fern's here. Councillor Fern, would you like to second that? Thank you. All right. Any wish to speak? No, we'll vote. Thank you.
That's 14 votes in favour, carried unanimously.
Thank you. We now move on to the actions tracking paper. And we've got Are there any questions of officers? I just have one question, Sarah, and that's really the only outstanding action, which is at the bottom, which is in progress. And note that spend targets are yet to be developed and will be brought back to the committee for approval. Can you give me an indication of when that is likely to be?
Yes, thanks, Chair. That will be with the next update. What we're doing current year is utilising improved procurement approaches to deliver on the embedded organisational savings target. And so as we mature our approach to recognising and monitoring and moving savings achieved through procurement, we will bring that in the next 6 monthly update.
Thank you. All right. Look, other questions? Look, I will move this recommendation. I don't need to add anything to that. Do I have a seconder, please? I'll thank you, Councillor Paul. Do you wish to speak? Does anybody else wish to speak? Okay, well, we will move straight to no right of reply, so we will move straight to the vote. I put the motion forward. Please vote accordingly.
It's 14 votes in favour, carried unanimously.
Okay. Now, I believe because we will be adjourning this meeting until 1:30 when we have the development contributions hearings, and because it's more than an hour away, we will need to formally adjourn this meeting till that time. That's right, Heidi?
Yes, that's right. So I've got a meeting adjournment motion for you there.
Okay, so I will be moving that motion. Councillor Foon, would you like to second it? Thank you. Take any debate? Okay, let's vote.
That's 14 votes in favour, carried unanimously.
Excellent. So that means that we are due back here at 1:30. If I could ask everybody to be back here on 1:30, because we will have public participants. And we, as I said, we will be going right through till 3. The time is fully filled up. So thank you, everyone, and we will see you again in 2 hours.
Thank you, Diane. Very efficient.
Thank you.
Councillor Rush, do you have a new dog, or are you just dog sitting today?
No, new addition to the household, Jenny.
Association, is that your connection?
Yes, that's correct. You know, we're here on behalf of the Retirement Villagers Association and Ryman Healthcare.
Right. Okay. So, are you? So we've basically allowed 10 minutes for retirement villages and 10 minutes for Ryman Healthcare, which is 20 minutes in total. Are you planning on using that together, or do you want two separate?
Yes, no, that's correct. We'll just do a combined presentation. Mr.
Okay.
Collins will start, then Mr. Brown, and then I'll follow up at the end of that.
Okay, so noting that once we hit the start button, you have 20 minutes, but if you can leave a few minutes aside for some questions, which I'm sure may well come following your presentation. So Heidi, if we can start get the presentation up, and then we'll hand over to you, Luke, to take us through it.
Right. Okay, shall I start then?
Yeah, I'll just hand over to John. Heidi, I'll
Okay.
just hopefully just give you some direction on the slides to change over as we go.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. So slide 1, please.
Right. Okay, well, I'll start, shall I? I'm John Collins. I'm the Executive Director of the Retirement Villagers Association of New Zealand, and we welcome this opportunity to provide feedback on the draft development contributions policy. The RVA represents the interests of the owners, developers and managers of registered retirement villages across New Zealand. Our 405 member villages operate around 34,200 units that are home to approximately 47,000 older New Zealanders. This is around about 96% of the retirement village industry by unit number. There are 5 registered villages in Wellington City that are home to about 560 residents. And to put that in context, there are some 36 villages across the wider Wellington region that offer 2,955 units that are home for almost 3,500 residents.
Next slide, please.
Okay.
Next slide.
Right. The industry acknowledges the importance of development contributions for funding new assets needed for Wellington's growth. However, the RVA is concerned the draft policy will hinder rather than help address the shortage of retirement accommodation. The policy currently does not fairly apportion growth costs based on the very low demand retirement villages make on council services. And the submission discusses that in more detail. New Zealand is facing a housing crisis, and retirement living and aged care are a key part of that. It's no secret that the country's population is aging rapidly. The over 75 demographic in Wellington City will almost triple between 2018 and 2048, from under 9,000 to almost 24,000 people. The wider Wellington region is the 3rd largest contributor to New Zealand's estimated over 75 population growth.
Next slide, please.
Demand for retirement village accommodation is far outstripping supply. That trend will continue due to the aging population and a longer life expectancy. And more people are wanting to live in retirement villages due to their many health, social and amenity benefits. The COVID-19 pandemic has also increased the strong demand to access retirement villages with only limited stock available. So I said earlier, there are currently 5 villages in Wellington City, with 5 more in development. Current and planned retirement capacity will only accommodate 5.8% of the over 75 demographic in 2048. And delivering major new retirement villages is a lengthy process, which depends on a wide range of factors. These factors include property market conditions, construction, building materials and labour costs, the timing of resource consents, approvals, and in particular, regulatory barriers and costs, such as development contribution charges. The current policy does not address the actual demands from retirement villages on council services. Based on our members' experience across New Zealand, this situation will lead to a substantial overcharging and unnecessary debates. There's a real risk that the current form of the policy will contribute to delays in providing necessary retirement and aged care accommodation in Wellington. As a result, the RVA is seeking a more proportionate and fit-for-purpose DC regime in Wellington, based on models that are generally working well elsewhere in the country. If adopted, this regime will help speed up and streamline retirement village construction. And I'll now pass over to Matthew Brown from Ryman Healthcare. Matthew.
Next slide, please.
Thank you, John. My name is Matthew Brown. I'm the New Zealand Development Manager at Ryman Healthcare Limited. So Ryman is the largest operator of retirement villages in New Zealand. We currently have 38 operational retirement villages in New Zealand, providing homes for more than 11,000 elderly residents. We have 5 retirement villages currently operating in the Wellington region. They're in Petone, Waikanae, Kandala, Kilburnie and Avalon. Ryman is planning 2 further villages, one in Karori and one in Newtown. We also expect to continue developing new villages in Wellington into the future to meet increasing demand. All of Ryman's residents are much less active and mobile than the wider population.
Next slide, please.
And we have undertaken extensive independent surveys to prove this. Due to age, frailty and mobility constraints, our residents use public and community facilities much less than the average person, if at all. Residents travel much less frequently and make little use of libraries, parks and other public facilities. Retirement villages are also much use much less water and produce much less wastewater per person than a standard household unit. Ryman has worked closely with councils over many years to ensure development contribution policies and charges fairly reflect the significantly reduced demand retirement villages have on council services. For example, in 2018 and 19, we worked closely with Auckland Council to resolve a major development contribution discussion over several sites in Auckland via a Local Government Act objection process. This process led to Auckland Council reviewing its development contributions policy to substantially reduce the household unit equivalent rates for retirement villages. Without similar recognition in Wellington's new policy, retirement village operators will be required to use the special assessment process and could be forced into a Local Government Act objection process. These processes are time-consuming and resource-intensive for all involved. We're very keen to engage with the Council further on our proposal. Our background in development contribution policies around the country is extensive, and we have a wide body of experiences and evidence which we are keen to share. So from that, I'd just like to ask Luke Hinchey from Chapman Tripp to outline a few of the key points on the regime that we seek and leave the rest of the time for questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. So Luke Hinchey, I'm a partner in the Resource Management and Environment team at Chapman Tripp here, and I've been working with the retirement village industry and Ryman in relation to development contributions for probably about the last decade or so. The key concern that you'll be picking up from Mr. Brown and Mr. Collins' presentations is that the current policy doesn't essentially acknowledge the low demand that retirement villages have on council services. And the industry is seeking a regime which is more bespoke or fit for purpose, particularly dealing with retirement villages, fairly much adopting the Auckland Council version of that. And the industry says that that's an appropriate method because it fairly groups a particular residential developer in a category which essentially allocates their demand fairly. And as Mr. Brown mentioned, there is a number of other examples around the country where that is working well. The point about the special assessment process is, I'll come to the details of that in terms of the submission point, but the hope here from the industry is that if the council adopts a specific regime for retirement villages in its policy, then that will essentially just reduce the workload and the potential debates that will occur in the special assessment process and other local government processes. Turning then to the special development assessment process, there are a number of technical concerns that the industry has about that, which are identified in more detail in the submission. And there is an assumption in there that special assessments will not be provided for residential developments. And that is of a particular concern to the industry, given they are a residential development and they do see that the special assessment process would be, at the moment, the only avenue to get a fairer and more proportionate charge to them. There are a couple of other points in the submissions around the extent to which infrastructure is taken into consideration for special assessments, and that needs to be considered further in the submission of the industry and Ryman. And we are seeking further guidance on that. And with that, I would certainly welcome any questions from the committee, either to myself or to Mr. Brown or Mr. Collins. Thank you.
Is that the end of your presentation?
It is, thank you.
Thank you.
Chair.
Great. We've allowed a good 10 minutes, close to, for questions. First up is Mayor Foster.
Yeah, look, thank you very much. So a couple of questions if I can. One of them is just to get clear understanding. So roughly speaking, you've got 47,000 residents, 19,000 staff. So roughly a sort of, 2.5 to 1 type ratio. And that's reasonably consistent across the retirement industry. So that's the first question, which is the easy one.
Should I do that one?
Yep.
Yeah, Foster, it's important to remember that our residents are, generally speaking, active, independent older people, and the retirement village staff are really around catering, maintenance, gardening, administration, rather than caregiving. So there is a crossover between retirement villages and aged care, where a resident might purchase a serviced apartment in a care suite, in a care home, using an occupational right agreement from in the retirement village legislation, and those people then would come under the aged residential care provisions. But by and large, our 47,000 residents are active, independent older people.
Yeah, no, okay, got that. Okay, no, look, the other thing is you're after a different formula, specific formula, and working together on a specific formula. And I noticed you've gone for Auckland, using Auckland as a basis, and I haven't actually looked at the Auckland one to see what it says. What I have looked at, though, is the Auckland base numbers, which are far, far more expensive than ours. So, you know, a unit being anything between about, well, the ones I had a quick look through, and they've got a great model there, 20-odd thousand to in excess of 40,000 per unit. So my question is, are you trying to improve your relativity in comparison to what is a relatively low DCs at the moment for Wellington, or do you actually genuinely want us to go something like Auckland, which was a much higher base, but you might have a lower number compared to that base? I hope that makes sense.
Do you want me to comment on that? Perhaps just, I mean, the Auckland context is different because the overall pool, I suppose, in terms of how much the contributions are funding the various infrastructure projects is a lot higher. So therefore the numbers are a lot higher. And Wellington obviously has its own circumstances in terms of what it's trying to fund. But the industry really doesn't, it's not so much about the numbers, it's about your point, Mr. Mayor, the relativity. So the numbers can be whatever they are, but I think the point is that the proportion of that number that is allocated to the industry needs to be fair and proportionate. So it's really that. And I think the Auckland model is seen as a fairer model because it has engaged in, I guess, the evidence of demand for the industry, and it has come up with numbers which are generally reflective of, you know, the overall demand that the industry creates on the council services.
Cool. And look, if I can just indulge in one other quick question, it's just particularly from a Ryman perspective, I'm very aware of one of your developments, and there's some comments being made in the submission about, you know, reserve provision, etc. But quite a number of these residential or retirement villages tend to exclude the wider public at all. I think you'd be on a much stronger basis if you actually if they weren't quite so exclusive, if there was some opportunity to move through them. It's a specific Ryman question, really. You might want to think about it. Thank you.
Yep, no, I understand. Thanks, Mayor Foster. That's yeah, I guess just to make the point, I guess for our residents, one of the main reasons that residents move into our villages is for that safety and security, and for that very reason, we need to be able to just control what movements there are through the village. But
I'm sure we can find a good way forward there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Councillor Pannett.
Thank you for your submissions. Look, I'm struggling with your logic a little bit, and I see that your profits were very healthy last year. I don't understand, and so I just wonder if that's what, there's some concern around that, around your business viability, because the reason that we charge these charges is because people do use our services. You have said in both parts of your submission, oh, these people aren't as mobile, but then you just said at the end they are quite independent. And rest homes, of course, and I do have some personal experience of this, do have systems to get people to pools and libraries. So it just feels like a bit that there is some challenge around getting you to pay the contribution that you need to, which is a very profitable business, which is very expensive. Most people in New Zealand can't afford this kind of care. And I'm just wondering if that's part of the issue, rather than actually people can use our services, and in fact should. It would be ideal if they did.
Yeah, I can talk just purely from Ryman's point of view. So all of our villages are comprehensive care retirement villages. So while we have the retirement village component of the village, the other part of that is the comprehensive care. And one of the reasons that people move into our villages is if they, if it's a couple or a person on their own, if there's a health issue, they may move into a Ryman village knowing that they will then have access to the care that's available in that same village, so without having to move again. So the average age of the residents in our retirement villages is just over 80, and it's sort of more like mid-80s within the care part of the village. So generally speaking, the residents, while they're independent, they enjoy just being able to stay within the village. We provide a lot of amenity within the village for those residents, so they have access to a library and swimming pool, hairdresser, movie theatre, cafe, and then really extensively landscaped and well cared for grounds. So most of our residents do tend to stay within the confines of the village and make use of the extensive amenities that we provide for them within the village. So that's purely from a Ryman point of view, and John may be able to speak more to the wider industry.
Yes, thanks, Matthew. My point about the active independent bit was to distinguish Mayor Foster's question about staffing, which I got the impression was really more aimed at aged care rather than villages. But villages in general do follow what Matthew's described in terms of a wide range of amenities for their residents, which the residents can then enjoy without having to leave the village. And that is an important distinction about retirement villages and the way that they work. They provide a degree of security, financial security, as well as personal security for their residents, and the way they do it is as Matthew described. On the cost of living, moving to a village, the business model basically reflects the average freehold home in the area where it's built, and then the entry price is roughly 2/3 to 3/4 of the average freehold home. So if the average freehold home is $650,000, $700,000, then the occupation right agreement is about 3/4 of that price. So the resident is able to sell their family home, purchase an occupation right agreement in the village, and have money left over, which they can then use as they see fit. And of course, if you are building a village in an area which is less well off, then the units will tend to reflect the price of the homes around it. It's perfectly true that our residents do need to have, for the most part, a capital sum to move in, but that capital sum may not be as large as what you might be thinking.
Can I just make one quick observation too on the point about how much a retirement village resident would use council services? Of course, residents do use council services, and I don't think there's any debate about that. It's really about how much they use them compared to other people, and that's what the local government act regime is set up to try and do, is distinguish with, as between what some people might use and what others might use. The example that's useful to be aware of is the objection process that Ryman was involved in, where independent surveys confirmed, which was accepted through that process, that a retirement village resident would use council reserves, community facilities around about 4 to 8% of the time compared to a normal person. So that, if you follow the logic in the Local Government Act, then their contribution towards that, those services ought to be something in that range as well. And that's why Auckland Council's adopted a 10% charge for reserves and community facilities for retirement village units. So it's not so much about profit or about not wanting to pay. It's more about just a fair share relative to to the actual use.
And thank you. Look, we're just about out of time, but I will allow quick questions from Councillor Young and Councillor Rush. And then there may well be some questions that we will ask our officers to sort of further engage with you on coming from this conversation. Councillor Young.
Right, thank you. So my question is actually for Matthew Brown about Ryman. So are your concerns about the development contribution the reason that you've done nothing with the old Den Hard's bakery, Tip Top Bakery in Adelaide Road?
No, that's not the reason behind that at all. There's other factors to consider with that one. That we've got engineers working on at the moment, so there are some quite complex civil engineering matters to do with that site, and our team are looking at that at the moment. So that's the reason for
okay. And one quick question.
One
quick question is, why are your developments so ugly?
I think that might be a bit beyond this hearing. So thank you, Councillor Young, but I'll let you take that one offline because I do know, there are people who also find it very attractive.
Really?
Yes, Councillor Young.
Wow.
Anyway, moving on, Councillor Rush.
Sorry, thank you. Good afternoon, folks. I am intrigued about the logic around the infrastructure not being used, and I get the playground example. I suppose I'd bat that back and say I don't use a playground either, and then you start looking at a broader sort of range of the sort of services and infrastructure provided. We've got a big debate going on about cycleways, which people say, well, we don't use them, and others say we do. I just sort of think that, aren't we starting to slice and dice, things right down at, in the end, the pools which have mobility parks, which will suit folks that are in your villages, mobility parks throughout the city, lifts, we all have different needs, I suppose, and young kids have theirs and older folks have theirs, and the city tries to provide for them all. Are we really going to be able to come up with more targeted sorts of development contributions in a fair way, in the way that you're proposing?
If you could be very quick on answering that, because we are a bit out of time, but we will give you the opportunity to provide a bit more information in another way if you wish. But if you could just quickly verbally give us some response.
Perhaps I just very quick response to that. I guess the point is that the regime that's been split out is being used elsewhere. So yes, it can be split up, and it works for other councils around the country. The template that you use for your development contribution policy actually does have a category for retirement units, but the council hasn't chosen to include that. So the government, at least at a central government level, thinks that's possible. And I think from my point of view, it's perfectly justified on the evidence, given that it's not so much, in this case, it's a substantial difference in demand compared to average users, and it's across a significant portion of your population.
Okay, thanks for that. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, John, Matthew, and Luke. It sounds almost biblical. But if you could, you've heard some of the vein of questioning. If you feel that you want to submit anything else in writing, would you please do? And our officers will consider that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We appreciate the opportunity. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, councillors.
All right. Now, I think next we have Reverend Stephen King. Is he here?
Yes, I am.
Oh, welcome, Stephen. Nice to see you.
Hello, everyone. Look, I'm not going to take a huge amount of your time, but we did, from Inner City Wellington, just want to speak to our submission. You'll basically see that we just want you to charge more. We don't think you charge enough for the reserves contribution if you compare it to other centres. And so, especially given that in the draft district plan that you have heard our cries for justice, and you've put some significant numbers in it with which you would hope to expand the amount of green space available in the inner city. So that's great for residents, but I'd also like to frame this discussion a little bit more into not just about residents, but in a discussion that looks at the overall vibrancy of the inner city as we go forward, given the uncertainties that COVID has thrown out to us. specifically, I'm looking at the our suggestion that you do what some other councils have done, Hutt has done it, and charge your development contributions for non-residential development. One of the challenges that we all recognise in the city is that, especially down, well, certain parts of the city more than others, is that this working from home, as it's become more prevalent, the challenge for the inner city economy with less workers is one that's presenting, right? It's the real thing. Well, one of the obvious places where some of that slack is met up is in the expansion of the residential community, which we are forecasting and planning for, because those people don't go home. They're already at home in the city. And so improving the overall quality of life in the inner city does two things for the business community and the residential community. It makes it a more attractive place to live, and it also live and work while you're there. And it also will encourage people to come in who are not living in that space. So look, you'll see there we're interested in the how you're setting the level. I'm not sure we would, we're not saying that we're as expensive as Auckland, though we probably are. But there is just, I think, a question to be looked at as to what is reasonable given the increase of value in the inner city residential areas, and given the extensive spending program, the capital spending program that you would hope to have in this new draft district plan. And we would like to see that reserves contribution would be levied on non-residential development in the inner city, because the benefits are across the board now for all people that will use the inner city if we are able to increase the amount of green space. And you'll also see that we support the indexing of charges. That was all I wanted to bring to you guys, and I'm happy to take any questions from that.
Thank you, Stephen, for your submission. And I think you quite clearly articulated in the written submission your rationale, especially around green space. Councillor Pannett.
Thanks, Stephen, for that. We've just had a previous submitter making the argument that some people don't use as many services as other people, normal people. I'm just wondering if it is your view that, the costs of providing public services should be distributed fairly around the city.
Look, Councillor Rush had a good point. You can't slice and dice this. It's not user pays. And part of this is about the attractiveness of the overall living environment. And so if we're talking about the inner city and we are talking about increasing green space or public utility of outside space, actually businesses should be paying, because they're coming, all those workers are coming into the inner city. They're here from 8 till 5:30. And during the daylight hours, which is the best time to use outside space, it's there and available to them for that urban space. And you're right, we all, I get that the people who use, who are resident in our senior citizens, whether they're a resident in their own apartments in the inner city or they're in an aged care facility or village, they may not be directly benefiting from the fact that there are pools and parks and playgrounds, but their grandchildren certainly are. And I think that is, I just think it's a vacuous argument. You're in the same argument about giving the rates back to the people that can't get in now because they're not vaccine passed. You just can't, you can't have bits of it, And I get if they're a huge contributor or you're doing a quid pro quo deal with someone, they're going to give you a park over here for something over here. I get that there could be discounting in specific spacing, but as a general principle, this is our city. Those are the things that are benefiting us. If not me directly, it's benefiting some of my whānau somewhere or somebody that I care about somewhere. It's it's what it costs to live in a great place.
All right. Thank you, Stephen. There's no other questions, but thank you for sparing some time out of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. We next up have Catherine Wilson from the Property Council.
Kia ora koutou. Apologies from Gerard Earle, who was actually going to do this presentation today, but has called me last minute. He's got pulled away to do something. He is our chairperson of Property Council in Wellington. So I will be presenting today to you. Look, I think first of all, I feel a little bit like Goldilocks because we did hear a bit of less and a bit of more, and I'm here to say I think you've got it, quite right, I guess. So in terms of who we are as Property Council, we're the fourth largest industry in Wellington. There's around 40.4 billion in property assets across Wellington, with property providing a direct contribution of GDP of about 4 billion, which is 10%. And we employ around 20,640 Wellington residents. Property employs that in Wellington. Property Council as an organisation connects property professionals and represents 134 Wellington-based member companies of private, public and charitable sectors. So overall, in relation to the DC policy, you've probably all read our submission, but we're in support of what you've proposed. I think I just want to also say thanks to Wellington City Council workers for their pre-engagement last year. Sorry, they came last year. They did come and talk to us early. They talked to our members, and I think that definitely pays off in the long run, just having that kind of engagement on what is expected, because that's something that provides our members with certainty. It's crucial that we have a robust DC policy that allows the industry to make informed long-term investment decisions. And while we believe that the charges are reasonable, our submission does have some recommendations to ensure that distribution is spread across all ratepayers. I think in particular, we have raised questions around Let's Get Wellington Moving and the funding of that, or how we're going to fund larger infrastructure projects, which is probably questions that will be answered in the long term, in 2024 long-term plan, for example. But I think we are a bit, cautious of, I guess, the cumulative effect of doing business in Wellington, because it's not just DCs. If you're a business, you've got rates or rates differentials and other things that can add on. I think also housing affordability and alternative funding mechanisms should also be taken into consideration for preliminary work on 2024 long-term plan. So we're conscious of that the proposal seeks DCs to also pay for community infrastructures, as increased DC fees will likely result in additional costs being passed on to the eventual home buyer or occupier. So planned developments will likely or could be delayed or increased costs due to increases in the future. So that's just something that we're mindful, particularly given COVID-19 has had on the business community. We also recommend in our submission that the council ring-fence revenue collecting from DCs to local areas, so we make sure that it is reflecting infrastructure costs in that local area. I think that's really, really an important point as well, to ensure things like intergenerational equity, so those that are paying for it, say in their house price or whatever, in their rent or wherever it is, are basically going to be able to reap those benefits as well. I think I've kind of touched on council considering alternative funding mechanisms for 2024 long-term plan. It would be great if we could also just chat offline in relation to targeted rates or special purpose vehicles. We believe that alternative funding mechanisms will ensure that those who benefit from the community infrastructure help contribute towards it over a long period of time, and that can also reduce the financial burden for households upfront. And house prices, I guess. What else do I want to say? It's important for council. I think I've already kind of done that. So basically, in conclusion, look, thanks for all the engagement that we've had to date. We would like to, signaled in our written submission that we're happy to be involved in future equivalent household unit discussions with council offline. And I'm kind of happy to answer any questions, but if there's any that might specifically relate to a member or, it might be better answered by a member, I can definitely set up some sort of separate meetings offline if you've got any questions. But yeah, happy to try and answer any that you've got now.
Okay, thank you. Catherine, we have a question from the Mayor.
Thanks, Catherine. Two questions from me. First one of them is you highlight community infrastructure as something you think should be excluded. I'd just be interested in thinking that if community infrastructure can be demonstrably shown to be required by growth, by a growing population. So that's the first question. And the second one is, you've mentioned SPVs and targeted rates. Is that a different way of doing it than charging? So we've got growth-related infrastructure of some sort. Instead of charging it up front, charging it over a period of time for the beneficiaries of that growth-related infrastructure.
Yeah, sure. So the community infrastructure question I'll answer first. That's just, I guess we just have concerns there around setting a precedent. So especially if it's, not ring-fenced to a certain area, and it could obviously, open the floodgates if we just keep kind of increasing those fees. So we just have to be mindful of how much we are, putting on the sector. And that's always been, a property council position. Like, all of our members are keen to pay their fair share. It's just, I guess, the proportion of that is often debated, and, you've heard that earlier today. In terms of targeted rates, your question on that, I think a good example of this is in Milldale in Auckland. There's a special purpose vehicle that was set up, and basically it meant that anyone that lived in Milldale will pay $1,000 a year on their rates, which would fund certain large-scale projects in the area. I think it's also going to fund some of the transport to be able to, to extend that bus lane where it ends in Auckland. So something like that would be of huge benefit to the residents in that area, because that is a fantastic bus service on the shore there, having that dedicated bus lane. So it would be something like that, and it wouldn't be that. I think the benefit of that is that if you're living in Milldale, that's an extra $1,000 a year over a 30-year period. But if you sell that house at year 15, that's a cost that you're not having to pay, when you move elsewhere. So you're really just benefiting because you live in the area and you're using those sorts of, high quality services.
No, look, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Catherine. You've been very clear. It was really pleasing to hear the compliments about engaging with our officers early, and I'm sure that will carry on. So we have any more specific questions, we'll feed that back to our officers, but I think you've given us a good insight into some of the other factors that we need to consider when we come back to consider our policy. So
great, thank you very much. I look forward to future engagement.
Thank you. And next up, we've got Rod and Guy Halliday.
Yes, hi there.
Hi, Rod.
Just trying to get my video on. Is that working?
Not yet.
Sorry, just bear with me.
It's all right. I think we all get, challenged with Zoom from time to time.
Apologies.
I still can't see you.
Yeah, I don't use Zoom that often.
Okay. There should be a little like a little video camera that if it's got it's got a red line through it, means stop your video showing up.
Yeah, I'm just hitting that, and
Rod, would you like to speak to us now, or shall I move to the next one and give you a little bit more time?
Yeah, do you want to skip to the next one and I'll just
I see we've got Craig Stewart online, so and we were running a few minutes late anyway, so we'll circle back to you if you keep in touch with Katie. Sure. And we'll work that in. So thank you. Welcome, Craig. I hope you're Yeah, we're going a little bit early, so hopefully that's all right. And I think you've got
That's
Deborah Mason with you as well.
Yes, Deb's just here next to me.
Thank you.
So
All
that's
right.
where my technology would go.
That's good. So welcome, and we're keen to hear from you.
Great. Well, look, as I'm sure you know, we're one of the bigger developers in the city. Recent projects are most of the new apartment buildings along Victoria Street. And look, over the years, we've probably finished, 2,000 to 3,000 units now, maybe more. We made a submission, and really the only part of this that we're really wanting to comment on is Area Q, which is the inner residential part of the levies. Look, at the end of the day, I understand the need for development levies. I understand that they're going to go up from time to time. As you probably will note from my submission, the bit that I'm struggling with is that the inner residential has gone up. Well, my notes told me it was 67%, give or take a few percent either way, which was very disproportionate to the balance of the other areas in the city. And my issue is that with virtually all of the apartment buildings that we're building now or that we have coming up, we have a very, very high component of one-bedroom apartments in them, and they're very much targeted and getting bought by first or second homeowners. And I know as a city and as a council, there are people that we need to keep in the city. Yet under this proposed development contributions policy, they're actually getting penalised the most out of any other housing, and particularly on a proportionate basis to what they now, or what they will buy a one-bedroom apartment for. Since we wrote this only 2 or 3 months ago, the world's changed again even more, and that part of right now, our first and second home buyer market has just ground to a halt because of all the reasons you read about in the media. And I feel like very strongly that as a city and for you as a council, we should be supporting them. I'm trying to do my job in terms of producing the type of stock and good quality stock for first, second home buyers to live in, yet the increase in the development levy is only going to add to the price of what we're going to sell these things for. And like we're aware of sales very recently in buildings we finished last year where one-bedroom apartments are selling now up to 700,000, which is crazy. The average sales probably in the mid sixes. You add 3,000 or 4,000 to a development levy across a building that will now have 70 or 80% one bedrooms in it. It's a lot of money. As I say, we factor in paying development levies, but my primary point is when you analyse all the other other parts of the city, the inner residential has gone up the most by a very, very long way. That's the gist of it really, is singling out the inner city, singling out the young people that we desperately need to stay in the city.
Thank you, Craig. A question, Councillor Pannett.
Sorry, Craig. Thanks for the submission. So I get your argument, but then who pays? You're saying then it goes on to the general ratepayer, particularly as we need to continue to invest in infrastructure and prepare for climate change. And also, what do you think about earthquake strengthening costs, which eventually have to be factored in, even with new builds, because I
disagree with you on new builds. Like at the end of the day, the changes in engineering have progressed hugely in the last few years. And if new builds are going to need re-engineering in 10 or 15 years' time, well, I'm not sure we'll even be living here any longer. It's certainly something where we now spend a fortune on engineering before we even start building anything. That's how difficult it is. In terms of the wider rate, it's all of the other suburbs use the inner city amenities. We could debate that forever. My view is still very, very simple. Where possible, is keeping prices down in the inner city, because that is our growth area, even more so after the events with banking and so on over the last few months. We've got a number of buildings in design, still predominantly 1 bedrooms, and I predict by the end of the year quite a massive upswing, because there was a whole lot of we've been losing people in the city to like Wainui, where you can go, and I hope none of you live in Wainui, where you can go out and buy a 2-bedroom new house for 760. Under the new banking regime, they're going to be only able to spend 650, and that means they're back looking in the inner city. We can't lose them.
Thank you. Mayor Foster?
Yeah, thanks, Craig. Question in 2 parts. First part of it, I'm suspecting, and you've sort of put your finger on inner city reserves, but I'm suspecting that probably is the issue. And I don't know if you heard when Stephen King was speaking that he's praised us for that. Mm-hmm. So is your argument around those particularly inner city reserves that a greater proportion of them should be, the growth related element should be covered by the people who are not the residents in the inner city, but the visitors, and that maybe it's the commercial sector on behalf of the visitors or wider? That's your first.
The wider city, yeah, that is my argument. The wider city is using those amenities.
Yeah, cool. Okay, thank you. And the second question is, you think of the sort of a lot of the 1-bedroom apartments. At the moment, we have a granny flat sort of 0.7 arrangement, or have had historically. Are you suggesting that we should have a differential between 1-bedroom and multi-bedroom, or 2 or more bedroom, or something like that? There's some sort of gradation related to the size of the house.
It is all I've singled out 1 bedrooms because that's the majority of typology that we're putting into buildings now. But at the end of the day, I'm dealing in a percentage. You know, my numbers told me that it's gone up by 67%.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it shouldn't be going up, but it seemed to me to be disproportionate to all of the other increases citywide.
Yeah. Now, my question really was whether you think we should be differentiating between the level of DCs on the basis of the size of the dwelling, i.e. that we differentiate. And let's take 1 bedroom versus anything else, that we have 1 bedroom being a bit lower than something else.
But you are already, Andy, because you're correct. A 1 bedroom is 0.7.
Yeah. Mm. Okay. And that, but you don't think that's enough?
No, I think 0.7 is fine. But again, I'm talking purely about the increase on the central city.
Okay, that's clear. Thank you.
Is very high.
Thank you.
Thank you. And look, just a final question from me. It is not quite directly related, but it's associated. Do you think our council could be doing more with government in terms of helping to build some of the infrastructure that we need to, that will then help reduce the cost of building?
Well, yes. Well, of course. But in terms of the building, the cost of us putting a building up, really, I'm not sure what government would spend that would assist that. Like at the moment, our direct compliance costs are to put the building up, but we're not really paying yet, apart from via development levies, for increased services and so on. We're starting to in the suburbs, where, for example, we've got a big site starting in Tahua. We're spending an awful lot of money on, stormwater reticulation and things like that. So, and that's no doubt coming in the central city. So yes, but good luck if you can get any money out of them.
Yeah, no, that was, and particularly it was interesting your comment about Tahua, because I know that government has a housing infrastructure fund, and whether we should be tapping into that a bit more.
Yeah. Well, again, we're putting about to start 85 odd houses. We're probably going to spend $600,000 or $700,000 or $800,000 on things that we believe we shouldn't be having to provide. They should be there already, or the capacity should be there already.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that, and thank you, Craig, for coming to speak with us. It's been really useful.
Okay, thanks very much. Bye.
Okay, so I've just lost my notes. Now, Heidi, are we all right? We on to Joe Bartley?
Well, we've got Rod, who's got his camera on now, so we could go back to Rod.
All right, well, let's go to Rod. I hope you don't mind waiting a bit longer. Joe, we'll probably will be a bit late, but welcome, Rod.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good to see you in person.
Yeah, got it sorted in the end. Thanks.
Yeah.
Look, thank you for the opportunity to speak to our submission. I am Rod Halliday. I work for the a group of entities who are developing greenfield land in northern Wellington. So that's Churton Park and Lincolnshire Farm. I know I've only got 10 minutes, so I'll just assume that the submission or feedback paper that I sent in will be taken as read.
Yeah.
I'll use the 10 minutes just to focus on two key points that what we're wanting to make. And the first one is just on page 3, which talks about the new contribution charges for areas I and J. So they are Churton Park and Lincolnshire, respectively. We were making the point in our submission that the contributions that are being taken for roading need to be reviewed, because in actual fact, we as a developer are building those roads. So just on that point, there has been some progress with Stephen Hart, getting acknowledgement of that and getting an agreement in place, a developer agreement in place, which would recognise that we are in fact providing the majority of those roads. So in that vein, I'll say it's a good. The policy is working well. There's obviously a lot of willingness to enter into those agreements with the developer where it's clear they're providing the infrastructure, and that extends to water reservoirs, etc. So that's just a little addendum to that part of the submission. The second point I just wanted to make was in regards to the non-residential contributions that are calculated at a rate of 42 square metres. This is something that we have repeatedly raised with council and objected to.
We just lost you for that 15 seconds, Rod. So you might just want to repeat that last.
Oh, sorry. So yeah. I was just moving to the second point of the submission, which was to do with the non-residential contributions that are calculated at a rate of 42 square metres. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you now. Thank you.
Yeah, so this is something we've repeatedly talked to council about over the years and made submissions on to the various other DC policies, and just making the point that it's not fair or reasonable to, and the policy is very clear how it was calculated. It was based on office space in the central city and an occupancy rate per worker, and then it was basically then applied across the board to all non-residential uses, including retail, commercial, industrial. And that's clearly not fit for purpose. And so again, as per the submission, we'd like council to review that. I saw some other submissions from other parties who highlighted that other councils have different rates for non-residential rather than just a single category, which, you know, for warehousing, for example, would fairly reflect the demand on council infrastructure, which is not a contribution per 42 square metres. So one of the examples I wanted to give you was just the New Zealand Post building that's being built up in Granada Village at the moment. So that is being built on a really large site, which has about 17,000 square metres of usable flat land. So based on the actual dollar value of that land, which is about $400 to $450 a square metre, and then you put the 11,000 square metre building on top of that, okay? And if you divide that 11,000 square metre building, which is just basically pretty much a fully automated postage sorting facility that's being developed by New Zealand Post. If you divide 11,000 square metre building, which is just a large warehouse, by 42 square metres, you get to 261 EHUs. And if you then apply the new proposed increase, which is an increase of about 60%, and it's going to be $17,500 per EHU, you get to a contribution of about 4.5 million. So I guess the point we're making is if you take that 4.5 million and divide it by the usable meterage of flat land on that site, you get to about $265 you're paying council for developments contributions per square metre. And so then I'll take you back to what that is as a percentage of the actual raw cost of the land, which was $400 to $450 a square metre. And the point is, as a proportion of the land value, what you're paying in a DC as a proportion of the raw land value is up at around 75 to 80%. So not only do you have to buy the land for that value, you're then looking at paying 80% of that on a square metre rate to council as a development contribution. So I guess the message that Hunters Hill, Lincolnshire Farm, Best Farm, Stebbings Farmlands want to make is that all you're going to do is push people out into other territorial authorities like the Hutt and Pūroro and even beyond when it comes to commercial use. So I don't know if there's been any other submissions or discussion internally with the committee on that number, 42 square metres, but it's been that way for a number of years, and it's it just seems grossly unfair to apply it to all non-residential uses.
Thank you, Rod. There hasn't been a specific conversation, but this is why we've come out to engage on our draft policy. And I think enabling you to have to give us that feedback is certainly a lot more. We're certainly aware of that now, and something that we need to consider. And officers will be rounding that back up when they do present the final draft to us. Are there any questions of Rod? No. Oh, Mayor Foster?
So it was quicker to stick my hand up and find the button. Rod, look, thank you. So are you inviting us to essentially form another category, for another category or categories within the non-residential, or are you suggesting that we've got to deal with these because there'll be quite a diversity of different, different businesses which aren't offices, which are quite different than that they're done on an individual basis? What's your suggestion?
Well, I would suggest that you look to other TAs and how they're doing it. And they're breaking it down into, sort of retail, commercial, industrial, warehousing. They're just creating more categories that more fairly represent, the demand. And in my submission, I've given you the example, page 2, of what we were looking at paying, how it's calculated. There is an opportunity for a self-assessment, but it's based on fixtures. So when we did the self-assessment in terms of fixtures, as I said, it's a fairly fully automated building in this example of NZ Pope.
Saw the numbers.
So it's pretty, it speaks for itself, right? I mean, you look at the number of fixtures, and we came up with that being equivalent to, say, 5 large household units in terms of the number of sinks and basins and dishwashers in that building, being fully automated. And yet the self-assessment process came back with 188. So, it's that part of the self-assessment isn't working either. So my suggestion would be to review the self-assessment process and also come up with some subcategories for the non-residential contribution rate, and not just a flat 42. I think you have to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Rod. And I noticed that you did talk about another category, the commercial, but also industrial. And I think, I hear that being, out there in the property market, they define that, they split commercial and industrial up. So certainly well worth for us to consider that aspect. So next we have Joe Bartley from Metlife Care. Welcome, Joe. You have 10 minutes, but if you could allow some time for questions if there are any.
Sure. Kia ora, everyone. My name is Joe Bartley, and I'm a Senior Development Manager at Metlife Care. So Metlife Care appreciates the opportunity to provide feedback on the draft development contributions policy for 2021 and 2022. Metlife Care also supports the RVA submission, but given that the important part development contributions play in the growth of the city and in Wellington, it has also filed a submission. As you'll be aware, Metlife Care is an owner and operator of 26 retirement villages across New Zealand. While most are in Auckland, MetLife Care currently owns and operates a growing portfolio of villages, including in Kapiti Coast and more recently in Pūroro. MetLife Care appreciates the need to fund crucial infrastructure in Wellington and the role of development contributions in providing that funding. We are, however, a little bit concerned that the DC policy adopts a simple approach that is not anticipated or appropriately provided for retirement village development. Due to the nature of retirement village development and living, they typically have less demand and infrastructure needs than a standard residential development. I'd like to pass it over to Bianca Tree, partner at Minter Allison Rudd and Watts, just to further elaborate on our submission. Bianca?
Thanks, Joe, and kia ora, Mayor and councillors. So one of the key things that was raised in the MetLife Care submission was the concern in terms of how retirement villages are provided from the policy, both at a really fundamental level. Firstly, retirement units are recognised as a residential use, but then there are other units such as aged care units or dementia units that would actually be classified as a commercial use under the policy or non-residential. So, you know, that makes an issue in terms of how the DCs are calculated and allocated from the start. And MetLife Care's position is that both care units and retirement village units all need to be recognised as a residential use. And then there's also a really key concern then in terms of how the draft policy doesn't provide for this use, and it's just provided for simply as a residential use. With the policy only providing for the two types of residential use, 1-bedroom units as an 0.7 demand factor, and then all other residential as 1. What this means in practice for a retirement village is often a retirement village unit could have 2 bedrooms, so that the residents can actually have guests to come and stay. So that 2-bedroom residential unit, retirement unit, would be charged the same development contributions as a 4-bedroom family home. And the demand for the council's services is just simply not the same from a retirement village unit or from one of the aged care or dementia units. And there's a lot of research that's gone into actually assessing and being clear and providing what an appropriate unit of demand is for these types of activities. And that's been considered by lots of councils, and there's lots of information that the council can draw on in terms of those appropriate units of demand. We've provided for proposed units of demand in the submission, and recognising the difference too between a residential, so retirement unit, and an aged care unit. The key concern is if the council doesn't provide for clear units of demand for retirement villages, is that special assessments will be requested. There is a concern first fundamentally that there's a note in the policy that special assessments can't be requested for residential use, but it also raises a concern that more special assessments will be requested because the policy will have significantly high DC payments required for retirement developments. And I think the critical thing is in terms of the council and having a development contribution policy is that there needs to be certainty. It needs to be fair, and you need to have a clear policy to provide for how your development contribution is going to be allocated in a fair way. But you also want certainty in terms of for the capital expenditure that you need to do, then how that is going to be allocated through to developments, and for developers to understand what their DC policy or DC payments amount is going to be for a particular project. If you are going to be relying on special assessments more and more, then it just creates uncertainty, both for the council and for developers.
Thank you. Are you, Bianca, and are you comfortable taking some questions?
Yes, happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Councillor Pennant.
Thank you for your submission. So I see also, like Ryman, that your profits were very healthy last year. I'm just curious why some of those profits are not being ploughed back into supporting residents in care using community facilities rather than just keeping people in situ. And, you know, like, is this really ultimately about that this policy undermines your business model, which seems to be quite profitable at the moment and may well be into the future?
I'll attempt to answer the question. I can't speak on the profit side, but in terms of the community facilities, typically as part of a retirement village development, a certain level of expectation is there to provide on-site amenities. It's not there to undermine the community or public facilities, but it's there to serve the needs of those moving into a village, given that is the expectation. I think, sort of turning to your point about undermining public facilities, certainly residents still use public facilities, but perhaps at a lower frequency than those who, your sort of typical Wellington resident. And I think that's sort of the point that we're making here, is that in terms of how the development contributions are assessed, we're just sort of after sort of a relative or sort of a fair or reasonable sort of assessment against where we think usage sits with our residents.
And can I just have some assurance that, unlike the previous submitter, that your residents are seen as being normal people, part of the community, because it just feels a bit like there's a separation between people in residential care and everyone else, which I wouldn't see as being correct.
Sorry, could you repeat the question, Councillor Pennant?
So there seems to be, the previous legal counsel talked about normal people and residents in your care, and you've just talked about typical people. I presume that your residents are seen as being part of the community and are entitled to as full support as possible.
Yes, correct. I mean, our residents are part of the community, and that's something that MetLife Care actively seeks as it designs its villages. It's more just around I suppose that the usage of the wider public facilities is that it's typically not as frequent as sort of the family that lives around the corner. A lot of the amenities are typically provided within the village, such as libraries and swimming pools and what have you.
Can I just ask one last question? Sorry, I don't use sports fields personally, my son does, but I don't. But I'm happy to pay for them. So it was a question one of my colleagues asked. Isn't it part of being in a good community to make sure that we've got good facilities?
And maybe if I can kind of answer that. So the key thing in terms of development contributions is they're paying for where development requires new assets, either new assets or assets with increased capacity. And that's the point in terms of the demand is not actually coming from retirement village development. So it's actually, what you need to do when you're thinking about it's kind of, I suppose it's also the flip side, do we need, because there's a retirement village, a new retirement village, does that mean we need a new sports field? No, you don't. So it goes back the other way as well. It helps the council in terms of their planning of what their demand is for new infrastructure.
Thank you. We've come to the end of the 10 minutes. Thank you, Bianca. Thank you, Joe. I think it's certainly give us a bit more food for thought around some of these aspects. Okay.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. And now I think we still got you, Bianca, Mark and Jared for representing the Stride Property Group.
Well, Yeah, good morning, Mayor. Good morning, councillors. I'll just firstly apologise for Mark Boker. He's been a late withdrawal, so you'll just have me today.
Okay.
Yeah, so Bianca will talk to us.
So just let me before the just like the previous one, you have 10 minutes, but if you could allow some time for questions and answers, that would be great.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, we understand. Yeah, cool. So look, we like the other participants, we appreciate the opportunity to comment on the draft district development contribution policy. Look, most of you will be aware who we are. We're Strider, obviously a listed owner and operator around the country. We own Johnson Shopping Centre, which some of you will know. We're under a mixed-use redevelopment, master planning and consenting phase at the moment. So really passionate about this. So Stride, we develop properties across multiple categories right across New Zealand, but also in Wellington. We have a long-term view of ownership, so we develop to hold, and we invest in developments that meet high-quality sustainability and design standards. And so we're really big on big community outcomes. Look, we appreciate the council's need for growth. We understand that. We understand that infrastructure and growth of infrastructure supports the city's growth, and obviously the Wellington City, you guys have a pretty big growth path ahead. We do, like the other three participants, I managed to jump on a bit early, have the same concern, guys, around the simplistic approach taken to the DC policy and the assessment, assessed units of demand. So sorry, you're going to hear from Bianca again. It's probably a similar message, but I will hand over to Bianca to talk through our concerns.
Thanks, Jared. And really the key concern, and what I'll just start with and focus on for a while, is in terms of just the non-residential category. And the key thing is it's just one category and doesn't provide for the range of commercial type activities that we have, and that have very different units of demand. What we see in other territorial authorities around the country is a much more nuanced approach in terms of recognising different categories of non-residential activity and the different units of demand that they have, both from transport to water and wastewater, etc. In Stride's submission, they have proposed that it would be appropriate to at least start with three categories, recognising retail and hospitality as one, commercial as two, and then production and distribution, which covers your industrial activities, as the third one. The other key concern when you're looking at the non-residential is that the draft policy provides for a demand factor of 42 metres squared GFA as being equivalent to 1 ihu. From what I could see, there was no explanation or evidence to support that. And I did hear one of the other submitters, do an exercise to then say what that means in terms of development contributions. We've done a similar exercise in trying to test that and compare it to development contributions if you're doing a development in another part of New Zealand. And the difference is really significant in terms of the very high level of DCs that you would be paying in Wellington relative to somewhere else. But I suppose my key point really is that your units of demand need to recognise actually what the demand that activity is going to have for new assets or assets of increased capacity. So the typical approach around the country that's taken is very different in terms of assessing those units of demand and how they're calculated.
Thank you, Bianca.
Thank you. I just had one quick comment on residential too. In terms of only the two types of residential use, one thing that Auckland has provided for is a granulated approach where they have detached residential, attached residential, and the attached is low rise, and then an attached medium to high rise. And what that does too, when you recognise those different and lower demand factors for your medium to high rise, is you're actually starting to encourage more intensive residential development. And that's better for everyone, and better also in terms of the costs of providing infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you, Bianca. And we've got a question from Councillor Pannett.
Thank you for your submissions. As you all know, our DCs are actually relatively low at the moment compared to some places, and we did that to make development more attractive. So 2 questions. Obviously we are a bit disappointed that we still haven't seen any development around the Johnsonville Mall, and I know there are some reasons for that, but given that they have been relatively low, is this actually going to encourage you to do, when the time is right to do that? And I guess, why should we be lower to Ms. Tree than other places when, you get a very good quality of life in the capital city of this country?
And I'm not talking about the amount of development contributions and then when you compare them to other areas. So each council needs to do their assessment in terms of the capital expenditure they need to do on the infrastructure to service growth. So you start with confirming what projects you need, and then what the value of those projects are, how they're going to be allocated across a time frame, and then how they're going to be allocated to particular developments in terms of units of demand. So it is just ensuring that any particular development has a fair and clear process in terms of ensuring they're providing an appropriate contribution to that capital expenditure.
Thank you, Bianca. Are there any other questions? Councillor O'Neill?
Thank you both. My part was around, I'm just trying to clarify, I guess, the proportional investment in amenity in and around residential developments and the DCs that you as developers contribute to those. And I just, Bianca, I know you spoke about this before, but I wanted to kind of clarify, I guess, because as a city council, we see it as a strategic priority to design a city for 8-year-olds and 80-year-old people and really make sure that those amenities are valuable and available everywhere. So I just wanted to understand, I guess, perhaps maybe some opposition for charging the same kind of DC level for people that live in mixed use and retirement areas and other things like that. I just wanted to understand your perspective a bit more.
Well, I suppose it does, in terms of residential use and having a more graduated approach to residential use. And particularly when you're saying then, so like a high-rise development should have lower rates. Part of that is in relation to transport. So someone in a high-rise development, they're usually living closer to a whole range of amenities. So they're probably using public transport or they're walking and cycling more than they're getting into their car and using the road network. And same in terms of, I suppose if you apartment users relative to, a large family home, also again, their water use and wastewater, it should be proportionately less.
Cool, thank you.
Thank you. I think we're just coming up to time now, but thank you, Bianca. Thank you, Jared, for your submission and for clarifying some of those points.
Thank you so much.
Councillors. Thank you.
All right. Now we have, last but not least, Matthew Plummer from Becca. Welcome, Matthew.
Kia ora, councillors. I'm actually joined by my colleague Ethan Duff, who I think is going to turn his camera on.
Hello. Yes.
Okay.
Sorry,
There he
just
is.
having some trouble there.
And
Okay,
Ethan,
welcome, Ethan.
Ethan's just had his booster shot, so he's fighting through that. Yes, look, we thought we submitted a letter with a few points to really engage with you around the remissions policy, particularly around sustainable buildings. We don't really want to relitigate our letter. It's there if you want to read it. But what we thought would be useful is talking to you around how the remissions policy or the remissions around the development contributions interacts with Green Star and self-assessment. And it's really understanding how buildings, sustainable buildings can reduce the demand on council's infrastructure. And obviously whether that can be ways of recognising that through not charging so much on the development contributions. You will have all heard of Green Star, but we thought it might be useful for Ethan just to quickly explain how Green Star works. And then perhaps if you've got any questions. So we're keen for you to ask questions rather than talk to you for 10 minutes.
No, that's fine, Matthew, and I'm sure Councillor Pannett's bound to have a question on this area.
Looking forward to it.
Thank you. Ethan, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. So apologies, my camera's not working for some reason, but I thought I'd take you through essentially what Green Star is and how that relates into the DC process, and in particular the remission, 50% remission on buildings which are rated as 5-star Green Star or higher. Green Star is a green building rating tool which is assesses the overall sustainability or credentials of a development. Green Star looks at a range of different areas like water efficiency, transport, energy efficiency, carbon, etc. And you can be rated as a 4, a 5, or a 6-star building. And so at the moment, the remissions process allows the DC process allows a 50% remission for buildings which are rated to a 5-star Green Star rating or higher. And so at the moment, that's a really good thing. It's encouraging a lot of sustainable building design. One thing that's not quite happening within that process at the moment is allowance for projects and developments which are making active contributions or active reductions in their impact on council infrastructure. So, for instance, buildings which have end of trip facilities for cyclists, so showers, lockers, bike racks, etc. In terms of moving people off the streets, encouraging lower carbon transport, or reduce stormwater impacts or low flow water efficient fixtures and fittings in the buildings. Buildings which don't undertake a Green Star rating at the moment aren't eligible to receive the remission contribution, even if they are doing all of these good practices. And so our view was sort of trying to understand if perhaps there was a way to have a self-assessment process within that, or to have a process by which building developers can improve the general green rating credentials of the building, but also without, sorry, Matthew, I'll let you jump
Well,
in.
I was just going to say, so two things I think they're really important to understand is firstly, a 5-star Green Star project represents excellence in a New Zealand context. So 4 stars are sort of reasonably BAU. We really commend Stride, who were talking before us. They deliver 5-star Green Star projects. We're working on one with them at the moment. And 6-star is a really, it's global excellence. So 5-star is a good benchmark to set this policy at. We support that. The scale is actually sliding. So as we move on, it's like a software update essentially. The software gets updated, but council probably needs to improve how it interacts with the policy. Just the other thing is that Green Star has various criteria in it as it's scored. So there are various areas. So if you look at the council's development contributions policy, it's there to offset particular costs the council's got to provide infrastructure, whereas the Green Star overall represents pretty broad thinking on the building's performance. It can be things like natural daylight, low toxicity paints, but neither of those actually impact the council's infrastructure. And what we think is there's an opportunity to align Green Star and the specific areas of Green Star to the council's infrastructure obligations, which means that the ratepayer gets a genuine bang for its buck on the building's performance, because otherwise you're essentially providing a subsidy for a fairly generic improvement in the building, if that makes sense. I think that's where we're going, Ethan, wasn't it?
Yes, yes, much more succinct.
Yeah, keen for some questions.
Thank you. Councillor Panic, you've got a question.
You invited me to, so I'm going to. Okay, three questions very quickly. First of all, so former Mayor Wade Brown and I put that policy through. So first of all, do you think it's working? Secondly, do you have any concerns around Green Star, given you can still get it like with Tākina with massive gas boilers in the basement? And three, there is some suggestion from staff that we get rid of the remission, I think, and then look at a grant system. What do you think we need both, just given we need to decarbonise rapidly, or do you think the remission is a better thing?
Ethan, is it working?
I think it is working in some areas, and there are other areas where it's not. So, for instance, if a developer doesn't want to get a Green Star rating for the building, which is quite an onerous and expensive process, they're not eligible at the moment, even if they do incorporate items which do lessen their impact on council infrastructure. So that's one key area. There's no process at the moment to enable them to self-assess their development against, say, the Green Star framework or another independent framework. The other questions there, sorry.
So the second question was around concerns around Green Star. Look, I can probably answer that one. In our letter, what we suggested is that the self-assessments, we should be able to look at self-assessments if they're delivering the same level of performance as Green Star in the areas where council's infrastructure is involved. So, yeah, minimising draw on the water supply, that sort of thing, that should be treated as equivalent. There are other tools available. So, I mean, things like Victor's project that we're not doing, but Victoria University is doing the Living Building Challenge for the new, I think it's the new Māori faculty building. That building is essentially having no draw on council resources. That's part of it achieving living building certification. So, you know, should that be charged a development contribution full stop? That was a question we had. Obviously we're not involved. The final question is probably not one for us to answer. We wouldn't be in a position to answer that in terms of the right way of funding it. But we certainly, I mean, Ethan, your views perhaps on uptake of Green Star?
So Green Star is seeing a very large rise in uptake across different buildings, not just sort of glass towers down in the CBD. It's across a wide range of buildings, including schools, industrial buildings, smaller commercial developments, mixed use, etc. But one of the other elements that we do need to be aware of is, as Matthew was saying, Green Star is like a software update. It's evolving and is changing over time as the green building movement, shall we call it, picks up speed. And so what a 5-star development 5 years ago and a 5-star development in 5 years' time may not necessarily be equivalent, or may not necessarily have the same outcomes on their impact for council infrastructure. So that's something that does potentially need to be reviewed, which is what is the performance level outcome which these buildings are delivering.
The council panel, just to finish off your point, or sort of respond to your point, is it working? We think it should be more. We think the Green Star individual criteria should be aligned to the council's infrastructure responsibilities. So rather than seeing it as a generic tool and you're just providing a 50% reduction for achieving 5-star, you should actually be looking through the various criteria and saying, well, these are the things where we as an organisation are on the hook for providing infrastructure. Therefore, we want to see those criteria satisfied. And we obviously look forward to engaging with your officers on how that could be done.
Thank you. Now we just got one final quick question from Councillor Foon.
Kia ora, everybody. Thank you for coming in today. My question is really understanding how this DC remission relates to what are other councils around New Zealand doing to encourage best practice?
That's a good question. I'm not aware of any other councils doing having with the same practice, and that's not to say that they're not doing that, but I do know that the uptake of the availability of the remission has increased the number of buildings which have gone for a 5-star development in Wellington.
I did ring around before we sent the letter, ring around the Becker family, and we were just asking whether anyone had any other experiences, and came up with a blank. So yeah, and I think we want to just also, this is a sort of the Wellington team having a bit of a think about how this could work. It's not the sort of Becker whole family thinking this is what Wellington should be doing, but we thought it was important to engage with you, and yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Ethan. Thank you for talking to us and clarifying a bit more around the Green Star aspect. Look, that's the end of our submissions on this policy. So now we will move to the recommendations. I think first of all I have to ask Heidi to introduce the report.
I'll just take it as read, thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, no questions of Heidi. Councillor Fern, you still had your hand up? Okay. So look, I will move the recommendations that we receive the information and hear the oral submitters and thank them for speaking to their submissions. I think it's obvious there. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor O'Neill. Do you wish to speak? No, thank you. All right, well, no right of reply. We'll move straight to voting. Thank you.
Can we just have everything up on the screen when we're voting?
Yep.
Thank you. Oh. Not the most contentious vote, I suspect.
I don't think so. And I don't think you think you've got a conflict, Nicola.
He's only the sales representative.
That's 13 votes in favour. That's carried unanimously.
Thank you. All right, that's the end of this meeting. So I will just, I'll declare the meeting closed and I'll just say the karakia. Onehia, 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 ki te uru tapanui, kia wātia, kia mama, te nako, te tinana, te wairua. Iti ara takatu, koira e ronga, whakaria aki kurunga, kia wātia, ki wātia, aira ku wātia. Thank you all.